recorded and live streamed. The webcast will be archived and made publicly available on Council's website within 2 days after each meeting for a period of 3 years. Our purpose is to provide greater access to Council debate, decision-making, and encouraging openness and transparency. However, Council accepts no liability for any individual opinions or statements. This is in accordance with Council's live streaming and recording of meeting protocols, which can be viewed on Council's website. I also remind all present that local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors, council officers, and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. Councillors, can you please ensure your videos are turned on, and if you wish to speak, raise your electronic hand and turn on your microphone. Nō reira, kia ora koutou. So to begin our meeting proper, councillors, can I make a call for apologies, please? I do have two. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, we have an apology from Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Can I have a mover from the table for those, please? Chairman Leader, seconder. Thank you, Councillor Clark. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. Thank you, carried. Moving to the public forum, there are none advised. Items not on the agenda, none advised. Order of business, no change as advised to date. Declaration of conflicts of interest. There are none. Thank you. Minutes of previous meetings. Can I have a mover?
I so move.
Thank you, Councillor White. A seconder. Thank you, Councillor Browning. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you. Matters arising from those minutes? There are none. Thank you. Well, we're going to move straight into our presentations. We do have quite a few presentations today. Or to all the presenters, thank you for coming today. We're going to stick to our time frame, but no doubt you come prepared for that. So with no further ado, I would like to welcome the Bay of Plenty Futures Academy and hand the rako to you all. Kia koutou. Thank you.
Tūtahi katoa ki te mihi atu ki a koe. Whaia, te amanua tēnei hui, ki a koe hoki a wha, moto karakia, tīmata hui nei. Ko Julia Puri Mackenzie tōku ingoa, no Ngāti Kahanunu, rangitāne me kaitahu. Engari, ka mahi au mō te tāhuhu o te mātauranga. Me ka mahi au kei roto i ngā kura tuarua, me ngā kura, me wharikura. Mai i a whanaparawa, pai atu ki tūrangi. He mihi atu hoki ki a koutou raurangatirama. He tino wiri au ki te tū kāmui a koutou. Engari, he mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. Ki te pai ki te noho?
Okay.
So, I'm Julia Puri Mackenzie and I work for the Ministry of Education. My role is past. I'm a Principal Advisor, Secondary Transitions. My main work is looking at, first of all, in school, what is happening around NCEA, but most importantly, pathways for our rangatahi. At the moment in education, there are so many changes that our schools are having to deal with. It's a wonder that they are still actually functioning, but we have wonderful students like you will hear shortly today, who are still managing to turn up at school and to learn and to be taught by really kaiapō who are passionate about this craft. One of the most important documents that we have in education presently is this document here. It's called the National Education Learning Priorities. And one of the key priorities, which you can see, is about futures of learning and work. So even in the education space, we are charged with collaborating with industries and employers to ensure learners have the skills, knowledge, and pathways to succeed in work. And that's probably what we want to talk to you most about today, is that education to employment endeavours, work. I'm going to share with you very shortly a couple of examples of how today learning is needing to look differently, because our young people are having difficulty with post-COVID and responsibilities as young people in whānau who are necessarily having to go and work to provide for their whānau or help provide for their whānau. So there's a setting in education presently that is concerning. So there's a charge on educators to look at learning in a different way. Attendance is low, engagement is being is a necessary is necessary for us to focus upon, so that we can ensure that our young people are going to be in a learning situation that is successful for them. When we're in schools and we're sitting around looking at NCA, the changes are in there are such that we're actually trying to really support Māori students more and more. NCA, and we have, I'm not going to bring out all the changes, there are only 7. One of the changes that is really clear is that vocational pathways is a new endeavour. Up until now, our school systems have looked greatly at a university pathway. And if we looked at numbers of that, we're looking at about 20 to 30% of young people going to university. So the question over the last 6 years at least have been, what about the rest? And so with these new changes has come this idea of a vocational pathway, the trades. And with the vocational pathway, we are looking to create an award that is equal to in mana and standing as the UE University Entrance Award. Learning can look really different now because of those pathways. We are connected and trying to connect more with industry, with employers, so that we have this pipeline from the secondary space to work with our employers, especially for our young Māori students. When we are looking at what do they take into the industry, what do they take into the employment, we're looking at what skills they have. Employers are telling us that we have, that they want to see greater IQ skills or EQ skills and soft skills, teamwork, how to work as a teamwork, resilience, perseverance. So those are the skills that we're kind of needing to focus on. I'm just going to share now with you 2 examples. Two examples. So this is a country, a wharekura in Ruatoki. So we have young people out of that school who were leaving and going nowhere. And I mean just sitting around in the community. So the Tumuaki wanted to do something different. And so along with the Māori Lands Trust, led by Paki Nikora, he was looking at his farm and saying, well, why can't some of these students come and work on my farm? He has an organic farm, one ahu whenua last year. So that was what we did. We connected Paki with the kura, and we found the primary ITO, the industry organisation who provided the course. We connected them. So what the school decided to do was that the students went to school at the farm for 2 days a week. They had a tutor, which was provided by the primary ITO, and they had buses and they worked there 2 days a week. 2 days of the week, 1 day of the week was construction. They've started this year. Another one was tile, where they were working at Bring Back the Birds, pest control. And then on the last day of the week that they would do work experience. So now things have developed there even more. So we're looking at media studies. They're wanting to cut a track up the back of one of the marae up to where Komiti's house is, and having cutting the track there, because all the kōrero, the rich kōrero that goes with what the track, all of that development. So the second development we had is iwi working with education. Iwi Ngāti Awa had wanted to look at their partnership with Extreme Boats, and they had came to us to say, we want to run a course. It was the first iwi that has ever said that to us. And so it was a matter of working with Cindy to how can we do this. So we had to work with the ITO, which is the Marine Composites, is now MAST, because you've got to have an ITO there. So in that regard, they put together a course, which is you'll see in the booklet that you've got. I've seen you looking at. The point about this is that iwi is now determining and leading the way in terms of connecting young people to their workforce development ideas. Okay, with that same iwi, we are now working with Edgecombe College. We have a big horticulture, agriculture interest there, and we want to build a primary industry hub. And so Ngāti Awa has agreed that these young people in the school go and work on their farms. So with this, we are looking all the time at innovative ways to get our young people from school working, whether it's 2 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever it takes, to have success with them in education, so they're not falling out. So I'm just going to give it over to Cindy, and she's going to talk to what the Trade Academy is about and how it fits in this.
Morena and kia ora everyone, I'm Cindy Lee. My husband and 2 children and I came to Whakatane 15 years ago for a 6-month adventure, and we're still on it. And I feel really fortunate to call the Bay of Plenty our home. So thank you for making time for us today. I know how time is scarce, but we really wanted to let you know there's a lot of things happening in the education to employment space that can positively affect our young people and our communities. So I just wanted to we wanted to let you know a little bit about what's going on. Can we put the Futures Academy? And at any time you can stop me if you have questions, or we can do questions at the end as well. So the Futures Academy, I gave you a booklet. So this is our current booklet. And we do try to have courses that are linked to our growth industries here in the Bay of Plenty, so that we can try to pathway students towards good employment across the Bay. Not sure if my presentation is going to come up, but anyways, the Futures Academy used to be called the Bay of Plenty Trades Academy. We were one of the first, I think, 11 trades academies back, 14, 15 years ago that received funding. And we started just in the Eastern Bay. And since then, we've grown to the entire Bay of Plenty, from Turangi to Tokura to Katikati to Kaha and everywhere in between. So we're trying to provide a 21st century hands-on trades training. So like Julia was saying, only 20 to 30% of our students go on to university. So we need to do something a little bit different. Trades Academy, the Futures Academy, is learning by doing. So this is one program that's a little bit different. So it's hands-on, it pathways to local employment. Students get NCEA credits. And some of the courses, they also get tertiary credits. And it's all during high school, it's free, we provide transportation. In a typical year, we have 2,000 students apply for our program. We have funding for 800 students. So unfortunately, not everybody can get in, but we do the best we can. Any kura or high school can be a part of our Futures Academy. It's really about, these are our current tertiary providers. I think originally it was just Toi Ohomai, used to be Wairiki, and now we've grown to have over 9 to 10 different providers. And again, that's about trying to meet the needs of our regions. And any school or kura can be a part of our Futures Academy. It's about student interest. If there's a course in here that meets the needs or the interest of a student, they can apply and be a part of this, as long as we have space. So historically, these are all the schools that have been involved. Some years we don't have a couple kura for whatever reason, but then the next year they might come back. Our courses are usually for senior school students, so years 11 through 13, but we do have a small amount of year 10 students as well. Students go to a course 1 to 3 days a week typically. And so that's a big ask for students to also balance with their normal mainstream courses to be out of school 1 to 3 days a week. But for some students, the courses that we provide, this is where they shine. It's not mainstream school. This is where they find success. So to me, the more time they can spend in this space is good for them and their outcomes. So we have courses in creative arts and design. There might be web design, animation, Māori design. We have automotive, so they might learn how to take apart a car, fix a car, build a dirt bike or a go-kart. And we have girls excelling in these courses as well. We have courses in construction, and we have students that are making Urapa water stations that are donated to the local Urapa, sleep outs. Some schools and programs are actually building houses to ease the housing shortage. So we can almost do anything with these programs. We have driver's training and forklift safety. Having our students get their driver's license is a huge obstacle to them being employable. So that's why we have a driver's training course. And then also, obviously, with logistics and the port, knowing how to do forklifts is really important. So we do have some training in that. And again, we have girls in this. We have early childhood education for students that might be interested going to become a teacher. We have engineering and manufacturing, so students could learn, so we have boat building, learning how to build aluminum boats, building dirt bikes, using machines to build things. Farming and agriculture, they do all kinds of, they actually go to farms across the bay and help with the livestock, learn how to fence, learn how to grow different horticulture. We have hair and beauty. Many courses in hospitality and cookery. We have a lot of cafes that need baristas. They need chefs. We're hearing shortages across the bay. So this is one way that students can gain experience and competence before they go into the workforce. We have a growing amount of IT and technology courses because that's where our future is going. Almost every job is going to have a component with technology, so it's important that our young people have these skills because they're the skills of the future. We have Maori performing arts and tikanga courses. So again, it's important for our students to connect with their whakapapa. It's a value added to add to our tourism. People come internationally to learn about our culture here. Sports and outdoor recreation, because our young people are pretty hardy. They like to do things in the outdoors and would like to work in that space. Tourism, as you know, tourism is has been historically a huge part of our economy. Wood manufacturing with our forestry sector close by. It's really important that our young people know what we can make with the forest, as well as how to take care of it. And like Julia was saying, recently we've started to partner with local iwi to find where we can provide collective impact towards good jobs for our young people. So last year we partnered with Ngāti and Extreme Boats to provide 2 courses as part of a provincial growth fund project that was funded a few years ago for Whakatane. So we started to do an alloy boat building and a launch it boat building course. We've only had maybe 18 total students this year, but we've had 3 students who've already been given employment through it. And it can pathway them directly into employment as well. So again, this just started. It's beginning days. We're still figuring out how to work out the kinks. But what's exciting is we can provide training that's going to pathway these young people into jobs that we have in our community and that are growing in our community. So we're kind of planning forward instead of reacting. Last year, we also worked with Whakatolhea and Aporiki College. They wanted to help ease their housing shortage, so we helped to fund a 5-day-a-week construction program at Aporiki College. We have 9 students who are helping to build a house, and it's actually almost complete. It's pretty amazing what they've done in maybe 8 months. With the contract with Kaingaora, this program is estimated to be self-sustainable after 2 years. So this is the first year. They've already built a house, and next year hopefully they'll build 2. And this is in conjunction with their other courses that they're doing for the community that are also about construction and other topics. But again, it's just about trying to provide that kind of synergy within a community. They can go on to apprenticeships or directly into employment. So it's just a smoother pathway for our young people in our community into good jobs. So after the success of this year working with Ngāriawa and Whakatolhea, next year we're looking at hopefully piloting a program with Ngā Potiki. So this is this Mahi Whakamana pilot. So this is this changes day to day. It's a working document, but it's basically I'm trying to disrupt what's happening at our local schools by using my funding. So my funding is available to high school students to get trades training, but we really need our high schools to change what they're doing. If only 20% are going on to uni, why are all our courses towards going to university? So I'm hoping I can use a small part of our funding, to support schools to provide more trades training to their students that are linked to jobs and ED outcomes. So next year, sometime, we're hoping to work with 4 schools in Ngā Potiki to offer 4 different courses that align with Ngā Potiki's strategic plan and workforce development. And again, the students can go to the courses. Our funding is used, so it's not a hardship for the school to try to do it. And then the students can go on into the jobs or apprenticeships that Ngā Potiki and the local Maori economy have available to it. So watch this space. We're having a meeting about it tomorrow. You know, we're still in development of it, but I see so much potential that I hope that I can do a similar project over the next few years in each of our smaller regions. I'd love to have one in Tokoroa. I'd love to have one in the Eastern Bay. I'd love to have one in Taupo or Turangi. Because it's really about growing opportunities for our young people, as well as supporting our communities. So that's, I see EV as being pivotal to that. So I wanted to make sure that you're aware that we're trying to work more in this space and really open to hearing about ideas and where we can add value. And I'm done, so I want to thank you for our time, but I do have students both online and here. This is Brad Smith from Tauranga Boys College, and online we have Julie Ball from Whakatane High School and our students, and they'd like to speak to you about their experience as well. Julie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, kia ora, ko Julie Ball ho. Thanks for having me. I'm a careers gateway trades teacher at Whakatane High. We've got 2 students, Hux and Ollie, and they are both doing the boat building course level 2 at Extreme Boats and through Te Mai. Yeah, so we've just sort of come up with some questions. What do you like about the course? So I'll get each of the boys just to have a word to talk to you. So this is Hux.
How's it? I quite like being in a team environment while I'm there. There's lots of different techniques when welding. I quite like that. There's not just one style, there's quite multiple. And I actually quite like learning how he just taught us how to work the welder. If it like breaks down, just do that. And I quite like that, you know?
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Hux. And this is Ollie.
Lots of the work is hands-on. It's quite easy, and our tutor really helps us. He shows us the theory work and he gives us examples of it in the workshop. Yeah.
Cool. So the other thing I asked them is, how will it help them? You know, how will it help them in the future? And yeah, and this is what they thought. So this is Hux again.
I reckon it'll help me in the future because I already have experience in the workshop. Therefore, next time I come to that stuff, I'll be like, oh, I already know what I'm doing. Bang, 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 straight into it, you know? And yeah, and welding can be used in a lot of things, trades. So, yeah. Thank you.
Right.
Our tutor, he's helped us learn new skills with heaps of stuff in the workshop. And we also can gain contacts with the workers there, and they just help us out and tell us if we're good or not.
So yeah, it was a pretty open and honest review about trades on the ground, but just the opportunities it's allowed students in our kura has been amazing. Like, I endorse everything that Julia and Cindy have said, and the boys really enjoy it. They go out one day a week to the trades on a Thursday, and yeah, mostly it's really, really look forward to, and that's across every trades in Futures Academy that our students are enrolled in. So thank you for having us.
Whakatane High School has had about 100 students involved this year.
Yeah, I could
that
probably
correct,
do
Julia?
more, but I'm not allowed any more spaces. But yes, yeah, thank you for having us.
Morning, everybody. My name is Brad Smith from Tarawina Boys College. I'm going to talk very quickly because we are involved in the Future Pathways Trades Academy and we absolutely love it. We are the third largest Māori boys school in New Zealand, up the road a couple of kilometres at Tarawina Boys, and what you will have seen from those two young gentlemen as well is boys love doing things. They love to get out of the classroom and make learning practical, and that's what the Trades Academy Future Pathways allows our young men to do. Very quickly, we have also got a course at the college that helps support the boys who are doing Trades Academy. As you will have heard, they're out one day a week at Toiho or the other providers, and so sometimes it means they're missing out a little bit at the college. So what we found was the best recipe for these young men was to have a core class of them at the college. And what we've tried to do is take the best part of primary, intermediate education, the best part of secondary education, the best part of tertiary education, and provide that for these young people. So what they love about primary and intermediate school is they've kind of got one core teacher that really looks after them, really invests in them, and they're with a core group of young people for the duration of the year at school. So that's what we've tried to do at the college. You'd call it kind of like a homeroom, but I don't like the negative connotation that is used with that term. So we've got one group of boys that stick together. The best part of secondary education is that boys get to select the subjects that they're most interested in. They get to pick the ones that they can see a pathway in, and they've got specialist teachers. And then also what being part of the Trades Academy allows our young men to do is it allows them to dip their toe into tertiary education, being part of all of those different tertiary providers. It gives them the confidence to know what tertiary education is like, and it really helps that transition into further tertiary study so much easier. They've met the tutors, they know where to go, they know the systems, and it's not so scary to then transition out into a level 3 pre-trades course or other tertiary education courses. So Mano is one of our young men in the course. We predominantly focus on year 12 because that's where we see, or sixth form for the older people in the room, sorry. So that's where we see the biggest need for our rangatahi is in year 12, is where they're really starting to find their direction, and that's where we want to support them the most. So I'll hand over to Mano.
Mona Tarawina, and I attend 12 in year 12, the secondary tertiary program. What we'll talk about today is both school and toy and what my benefits are from taking this course. What I like about 12 in is that I'm able to explore my own interest, which the program that I'm taking is automotive. The automotive course is provided by the school. So I'm able to get a real world experience and hands-on at toy. It also increases my ability to have an equal relationship with other students as well as my tutor, as we're all on the same page, no one's above, no one's under each other. With school, it's practical nature, I'm outside the classroom, not as well, you build a strong relationship with the class as you're all set with a certain amount of boys for your whole year. The secondary program has helped me in both school and work by giving me more enjoyment in school, as over these past couple of years it's been a bit harder with COVID. So yeah, school has also introduced me to new pathways. It's given me a wide variety of choices of different careers that I'd like to take in the future. It's also offered me the willingness to learn. So I'm always willing to learn new things with this course. They offer me things from employment agreements, diversity, and other outdoor education needs. Movement wise also helped me a lot. It's same as school, giving me opportunities of other pathways. It's increased my self-management, communication, and time management. And my next step, I guess, after this year would be to attend school at the level 3 trade academy course, where it's 2 days a week. But instead of carrying on with my automotive program, I feel like I want to do culinary and hospitality. The reason for that is because automotive is a hobby for me, so it's a personal benefit. But as a career, I like to do cooking and hopefully become a chef a lot. Cooking has always been a goal of mine ever since I was young. In the kitchen, with the old man and going. As I go back to school, schooling has introduced employment will also take it further for me, either it's to a new career or just more study. Yeah, I guess we'll find out from there.
Are there any questions?
Okay, cool.
Before I do start open the floor to the questions, I just want to thank you for coming to give your presentation. I want to thank the students. I think what it brings our attention to is that we have a scholarship ourselves, albeit it is, I would say, lends to the academic side of things. So it is a breath of fresh air to see you come in to speak to us about how you're progressing the trade and bringing that on an equal playing field with academia. So, ngā mihi kia koutou. We'd like to talk later, maybe with those of you that are in the schools, and how we can play a more supportive role in what we do here in the Regional Council, and aligning some of our support to that trade part of the program. On that note, I'll open for questions, and Councillor Clark has his hand up.
Kia ora tātou, nami nui ki te kanahiro, ka tātou korero. Pātai, given the disturbing news today that in the Northland, only 35% of students are attending school on a regular basis, which is rather frightening. What support and counselling services do you have in place to ensure that actually the courses that are started are completed?
Kia ora koutou Pātai. I'll start. The attendance issue is a huge one, engagement, and there has been now from the government an attendance and engagement strategy. This is going to be followed by ways in which the schools can think about their students in their local areas pertaining to what their schools are like and what's happening for them in their hardboarding. So funding will be given in some form or other. I'm not sure how that's going to look. It's just very new. And I know that stakeholders are meeting today to look at how they might be able to use that funding. And when it comes to the trade, in actual fact, we've got a lot of students who attend the trade courses, but don't go to kura the other days. So this pathway is of great benefit for engagement when it comes to engagement. Because if we don't have that, if we can't entice our young people, we can't look after them in school, or they feel that they can come and be still in a place of learning and feel safe, then we're not doing our job.
So alongside that, that's why we're looking at this Mahi Whakamana project, because it's enticing schools to provide a trades course 3 days a week where the students get all the credits they need for that, passing that year through the trades course. And so we have to start small, might only be 4 schools, but if it's successful, hopefully it will grow and more schools can see, actually, this is a great way to keep our students engaged. Because honestly, we need a systems change. And that needs to come from Wellington. But this is something that we can do for now that can help disrupt things and create some change locally.
I think also that we're having a lot more employers, a lot of industry leaders who are actually coming into the space. I just met with ATD Construction the other day. We're looking at offering connections for Māori specifically. So the industry are looking at these issues themselves and offering us ways to move forward for our rangatahi.
Thank you. I've got questions from the floor. They will go in this order. Councillors White, Rose, Nees, and from the table, Murray Tapsell. Councillor White.
Mihi ki a koutou mō koutou whakāturanga pai ki a mātou I tēnei rā. Ki a koutou ngā tauira, ki a kaha, ki a maia, ki mano nui. Look, I enjoyed that presentation and I like the notion of disruption. Okay, without that disruption in kura, we're going to have the same old, and business as usual will not work. So I congratulate you in being disrupted. I guess one of the things that, as I'm listening to our tauira, they are really enjoying this and listening to the question that Councillor Clark raised. One of the things that you mentioned earlier on was soft skills and building the confidence in communicating. I mean, it takes a lot of confidence and strength to front this sort of scenario for our students, let alone our adults as well. So, so those sorts of confidence, do you find that the confidence is building as they go through the program in a context of willingness to communicate, willingness to stand up, willingness to present themselves, that type of thing?
Most definitely. At the end of the year, when it's a non-COVID year, we have a prize giving and the stories of success from the students about coming from at the start, barely being able to speak in class, having lots of questions, to being fully confident, helping other students to succeed in class. It's beautiful. And I'm not saying it's for every student, but for the majority of our students, they grow in confidence, they grow in skills, they feel like they are more capable, they have more pathways available to them. And so that's why we want to do more in this space if we can.
Just one follow-up question then. You mentioned technology as one of the future pathways. And my take on it is our rangatahi, our young people are pretty much basically into technology already. So one of the pathways spread for technology that you're looking at, because I guess technology comes in, mechanics comes in, you know, all those automotives. The basis for a lot of the work these days is technology. How is that developing within these programs?
Okay.
So it's probably the main thing would be the equipment. So young people, don't get me wrong, they're great at using social media and things like that aren't necessarily the right technology, but the technology is development and is the development of the students is the use of the correct technology, CNC machining, 3D printing, all of those kind of things. You know, gone is the perception of a torque wrench and grease kind of things like that, and now it's diagnostic stuff within the automotive, within the engineering, with all those kind of things, and it's providing those students that often schools cannot fund those kind of facilities at the college because we're trying, well, we're losing workshops in schools now. We're losing specialist classrooms, and so being able for the students to be able to access those kind of facilities at places like Toi Mai, etc., that's where they're getting those technology skills that are required for industry. Hopefully that helps.
And I was just going to share that all of our tertiary providers, they create the courses based on their the workforce development councils are saying what's needed with their industry partners. So each of them uses technology in their own fields and then creates a class around that.
There is an issue though for Māori, and the truth is that our Māori are really good at hands-on. Of all of the different types of clustered skills, technology is one and design is another one that we need to help our Māori students grow in further.
And there can be a digital divide. Some of our families do not have access to computers or internet. And so that can become an issue in a COVID world, but also just day to day, because more and more is happening digitally. So that's something that we do need to take a look at as well.
Thank you. Councillor Rose. Councillor Rose.
Ka mihi nui ki a koutou, e te kaimahima, e te tauira. Beautiful mahi. Always been someone who loves to hear about the mahi that our rakatahi are up to. I must say, it does come close to heart because I was one of those students who struggled in school, and ending up getting into the barber industry, it was definitely a beautiful kaupapa, and that was through the Gateway program through the Manawatu. So I guess my pātai sits in and around your numbers. You say you've got about 2,000 tauira who want to kind of be involved, and you've got to lower that number down to about 800. Have you guys thought of any plans or anything to kind of increase that number, whether that be slowly or at an increased rate, or are you kind of happy with where that 800 sitting at the moment?
Definitely not happy with that number at the moment. I guess people are getting really creative outside this particular program. And Brad, at Tarawina Boys, you'd be great examples of creating your own pathways. Would that be true?
Yeah, we're trying our best.
Yeah, so it's up to, no, it's not up to schools, but schools have taken the bull by the horns and said, okay, we've only got these amount of places, but we want to do this. And so they are beginning to create pathways for themselves, but it always comes back to funding.
So in the last 4 years, we have almost tripled the numbers in our program. So we are growing. We write a business case every year, but we're somewhat hampered by central government and how much funding they have for this overall program, because it is a national program. I would love to get to the point that maybe that I look at philanthropic funding, industry funding, iwi funding, like where could we go for the good of our young people in our region? But early days in that, So there's lots of potential.
So supplementary part idea, Madam Chair. I guess my next part would be: would you approach the size of local government in and around funding? Mainly because if you look at what the mahi you guys are doing, a lot of it does sit in the taiao space and in the environmental space, and so for me, I think it would be a really good opportunity for the likes of our council and other councils to be involved in these sorts of kaupapa to help our future generations moving forward. So would you guys consider that heading into the near future? Of course, with local government elections currently happening, it's a bit difficult, but would that be something you would consider?
Definitely, absolutely.
And thank you, Councillor Rose. I have extended to them an invitation to come and speak to us further. Thank you. Councillor Lees.
Kia ora tātou. I just want to congratulate you on your presentation. It's fabulous to see somebody that's actually moving the needle within the schools to make them attractive places to stay. I work with youth that have been out of schools for quite a long time, and many of them are on the benefit, and I'm associated with a program which has got a 70% success rate in getting them into meaningful jobs. The secret that we have found is that within the business that you place them, there is a mentor within the business that can provide them with support. when they hit a roadblock, which is quite often something that does happen. And also that they're given a very good grounding in employability skills, so soft skills that employers are looking for. And also, unfortunately, quite a few of the youth that we deal with have got poor numeracy and literacy skills, and the mainstream school system has not worked for them. So we're working at the other end of the spectrum, but I'd just like to say thank you so much for the work that you're doing, because I can see how that will reduce the numbers of those that are leaving school early and are just floating on the wind. So thank you.
Kia ora, Jane. Can I just maybe to you and to Craig, because I know the work that you do, and you're absolutely right about the mentorship as in addition to helping look after our young people once they leave and actually move into the workspace. I heard a kōrero the other day, I do, you watch, I do, you watch, I do, you do, you do, I watch. And so this is the scaffolding notion of what we need to do, especially with our young rangatahi, is that we just don't just send them off and good luck with your life. We need that transition and that mentoring. So he mihi nui ki a kōrero.
And our last question, kia koe Maru.
Kia ora nō, tātou, katoa rā. What you're going through is nothing new, because I see it as a renaissance of what used to happen. What has been lacking in our education is the practice and the theory. And we're being bogged down by theory. Take, for instance, the university's economy is based on immigration. So therefore, there's a negligence of our own people. If you have a look at Turangi, the dams, a lot of them were our own people that came from Manatar over to there, but they wanted to employ the Italians, but we had the better skills. So it's practice and theory. It's practice where you find the theory. There needs to be a provisions for theory to mix in with practice. If we go back to Tarawina, when Tarawina blew up, the innovation at that time was penny diving and the renaissance of carving school. As a consequence, Tupuia Springs became the carving school. Penny diving became a multi-million-dollar tourist industry. And then there was a link between the geothermal area and Queenstown through Mount Cook Airlines. So these innovations had started by ourselves. And all our land trusts are guilty of not setting the basis. I can name a number of land trusts. The other thing is we now own the Central North Island Forest, all the logs in the Central North Island Forest. We should be able to create the innovators to do fletchers out of their expensive timber and provide our own timber mills. And where are the innovators of that? And in terms of farming, farming has lost the art of the number 8 wire. They're all theory today, whereas one time they had the innovation. We were number 8 wire workers. And of course, so it's that practice that's lacking. The theory, you can always get the theory. They used to have community colleges at one time. People used to go to work and do their theory through community colleges. Community colleges were abandoned. And a golden opportunity was the Wānanga Aotearoa. And that was taken over by Toyohomai. And as I pointed out, Toyohomai, their economy is based on migration, immigration, their bucket of money. Without immigration, they're broke. And of course, we need the innovators to actually play that part and role. But you're on the right track.
And on that note, once again, I want to thank, and on that note, sorry, once again, I want to thank you for coming to share.
Bye-bye.
Kia ora koutou.
Thank you.
Take care, thank you.
Tēnā tātou. Rangatiri, tēnā koutou. Rangatiri Reef, korua i ngā rangatiri tō taha, e mihi ana ki a koutou. E whai ana ki te kiti o tō kanuhi anō, e te rangatira, te mema o te kaunihira i muri, e mihi ana ki a koe, nau mai, hara mai, piki mai, poki mai. Nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Nice to have you here, Heath, and as well, and just acknowledging you as well, Tiffany, as our past member of this council, and of course to your side, obviously one of your advisors, Anthony, they're welcome as well. So we look forward to your presentation, Ngā Tarawina, on your treaty settlement, and well done, congratulations. Kei a koutou te wā.
E te roa, taru tēnā koe mō tō mihi, mō tō karaki e tia mātou. Te temana, ma te moana, tēnā koe, tēnā koutou hoki i tau. Lyle and Kevin from Rotorua, tēnā koutou, kei ngā rangatira katoa, kura tātou. Now, do we have a presentation that's, and I'm sorry, it's behind you. Oh, you got it all? Okay. Listen, what Tiffany, who's been introduced to you as a former councillor, but he's a current trustee of Te Manawa Ngāti Rangitihi and one of 4 negotiators for our settlement. Myself, Tiffany, Kenneth Throwerty and Delwyn Rondon were the negotiators. And to my left is Anthony Olsen, who you will hear played an extremely important role in being our principal historian and providing the research so that we could tell the stories that we were able to develop. So kia koe, Anthony. What I want to do today is really touch on the settlement, but more particularly talk about the Tarawina Restoration Strategy Group for 2 reasons. One is we thank you, particularly Tarawina and I'm going to forget his name now. No, Pākehā, Chris, Stephen, who sat alongside us at the vital time when we were talking to MFE and Te Arawhiti and others to help us shape the Tarawina Restoration Strategy Group. So thank you, Bayapiti Regional Council, for that work. And your involvement in our success will be vital. And so it's really important that we have this opportunity to talk to you today. Let me start off by just saying that we really started our settlement journey before we started our comprehensive claim with participants in the CNI settlement. And I heard Maru talk about the CNI settlement and the fact that we own all of the land that the trees are being planted on, and over time those trees will be coming back to us as well. At the moment, we don't own all the trees, but we do own the land, and there is a process for us to get the trees back. But why I put this up is that when we started with the CNI settlement, the perception of Ngāti Rangitihi, both by the Crown and some of our neighbouring iwi, were that we were a very small hapu. In fact, many of them called us a hapu of Tuhorangi, not a iwi in our own right, of about 2,000 people. And the Crown had this view that we had a small rohe that was structured around Ruawāhia. And so that was the perception of Ngāti Rangitihi, and as a result of that, when they came to divide up the Central North Island settlement, we got 3%. of what was being offered. Since then, however, with the comprehensive claim, we've been able to change that perception. And this slide isn't about us wanting to show off or be bigger than we are, but it does show that when our story is told, and this is why I'm leading to Anthony, we are able to show that we are an iwi of around 10 to 12,000 people. Is it up? Here we go now. We have mana whenua interest that goes from the moana of Otamarako and Manatar, goes up the Tarawina Awa, across Ruawahia, and out into the River Whakaitu down as close to the Mihi Bridge. So that is an extensive rohe, and in that rohe, during our settlement, we've been able to get culturally significant lands back at Manatar, at Tarawina, and through the C&I mana whenua process, our 3% has gone to 18% of the forest land at Reo Whakaitu and other places. And this is what a settlement process is all about, because it gives your people confidence about who they are. For example, and this is no disparaging comments about our neighbouring iwi, when Ngāti Awa settled, they did not mention Ngāti Rangitihi at Manatar at all. In fact, their view of us was that we came to Manatar after the Battle of Kahakaroa in 1863, and the only reason we were at Manatar was because we got land given to us as a result of us supporting the Crown in that action. It was the same at Tarawina, where Tūhaurangi believes that they are the iwi that controls the Tarawina rohe, and there's no doubt that Tūhaurangi as a man in his day had wide mana in that area. But again, both of those iwi now accept our stories. They don't necessarily agree with us and our story, but they respect our stories, and through working with Tūhaurangi, we jointly got back Waimangu Thermal Valley. They got back Otu Puarangi, and we both share in a place called Tiariki. And at Manatar, Ngāti Awa and Ngāti Rangitihi share some land, both at the cut, where the Te Awa Te Atua used to come into the lagoon, and in the sort of the sensitive area of Kahakaroa, we both share that whenua, and that came through our settlement. But for all that, and I'll hand over to Tiffany, and now, when we wrote our aspirations document, a lot of people in the settlement will say to us, how much money did you get in your settlement? Or how many sort of commercial buildings did you get? Or how many farms did you get? The number one, the number two, and the number three thing that our people wanted returned were our waterways and our land, so that we could restore the Māori of those important places. And I'll hand over to Tiffany, because I think this next slide is really important.
This one here?
Yeah.
Yeah. The kind we no tō karakia. Anō the chairman Patimwana Rauko Doug Koro Lyle, Andrew, Kevin, Jane, Billy, Stu, and Norm. Kāna ki me kia koutou. It's probably the longest time I've ever sat without saying anything. Sitting there, I went on. Oh, no, that's right. I'm not a counsellor. Yeah. So, look, I spent a great deal of my life protesting about the pollution of the Tarawina River. We chromed that name Black Drain, because it was black back in the day when we were kids and teenagers and growing up in our 20s, 30s. So it was black. It's more of a brown drain now. And not that I'd like to say that publicly, not to the companies anyway, because we still need it clean. The thing that when we went to negotiate firstly with Chris Sprinleyson when we were CNI and stuff like that, and then with Minister Little in recent times, I was always the one in his office or in their office saying, wait on, remember the first 4 years of the pollution, the government owned Tasman. The government built Tasman, the government owned Tasman. So this pollution of our river was by the government. It wasn't by, no, I won't say the F word, farmers, no. It wasn't by industries or anything like that. It was the government made Tasman, and then in 1954 when they realised there was that much pollution going to go in there, and all the technos that built it from Finland and Canada and everywhere else, they all knew you're going to have to need a place to dump all the crap. And when they found that out, they did the enabling, the Tasman Pulp and Paper Mill Enabling Act 1954. So they went down to Wellington, got the politicians to say, hey, wait on, we've got to have this, we've got to have a drain to put all this you know, all the chemicals in that. And so they enabled that, the Enabling Act, the Tasman Enabling Act 1954 is the act that they passed to allow it to be a D-class river, which was, D-class means they could dump anything in there. And when we were kids, we were still whitebaiting at the mouth with Dad and that, because we were, you know, just young fellas in 1954. I was born in 1954, so we were in the 60s, still going down with Dad, and, you know, pipes and 44-gallon drums would float past, and our own people would say, oh no, the boss just told me to back the truck up and dump it all out the back into the river. And so it was horrific in the old days. One thing that is, and that's the thing that's different, and I hope that this council's not going to just slot us into another Rangitaiki River Forum and a Kaituna River because of this point that the government polluted our river, not industries that have polluted Rangitaiki, Kaituna. So that's the important part of this our restoration group. We'll get a Māori name for it eventually, but is that it's going to be, we want it to be more than just a Rangitaiki, and where it just slots into your the regional council plans, and it just you know, it just becomes another it just plods along like they are, you know, only a certain amount of funding is given to them, and I've just got the word to, that's it. Yeah, Stu, did I mention you, Stu? Yeah.
Anyway, just to segue into Anthony, who'll talk about why this is so important to us. Two things to remember. Two previous settlements had taken place, Tūwharetoki Kawerau and Ngāti Awa, and during those settlements, the Crown would not accept that it had breached the treaty over the pollution of the river. But one of the things we're very proud of is that in our settlement, the Crown acknowledges that they breached the Treaty of Waitangi in the way that they dealt with the Tarawina Awa, and also the way they dealt with Te Awa or Te Atua. And so they acknowledge the brief, and they have made an apology, and what is better, they have put into statute an organisation, which is the strategy group, to restore the Māori of Te Awa, Te Atua and the Tarawina Awa. And we'll come back to the importance we're putting on the word restoration of the Māori. But Anthony, how did we get to this point?
Really, taru te mihi, matamona, taru. Yeah, so for me, as part of the research, was actually going back, and rather than actually taking it as read that Ngāti Rangiti had their connections to these places,
my job was to go back and actually find primary source evidence to actually give effect to that. And so I actually found a plethora of information in that regard. And so I'll start the first slide I've got. You'll see a map on the right hand side of that slide. And so in customary times, pre-European times, Te Awa Te Atua, and so that was the Tarawina River and the outlet, was a very big and wide riverbed. It was the meeting place of three awa, Rangitaiki, Tarawera, and Oreni. More importantly for Ngāti Rangitihi, it provided a link between its coastal lands that it occupied and its inland places. And for that, what I've said there is Tarawina River effectively was a highway, not just for Ngāti Rangitihi, but predominantly for Ngāti Rangitihi, but also, for Ngāti Awa and Te Wharetua, but that highway, that was the main place. Nonetheless, along the side of that huge big swamp that stretched from Manatar to Putauaki and across the Whakatane was just a huge big swamp, I think in about 1906. It rained for a year, they said, and it was just a giant lake. And that was in the Gibbons book that talks about the Rangitaiki Plains. So here are some photos that we have just about the significance of Te Awa Te Atua. So that place that's called Manatar now, Ngāti Rangitihi called it Otamarora. And Manatar got its name from Te Manatar Pa, which was down by Greek Road. But here you'll see the significance of Manatar to the people that lived there. So top left-hand corner, I mean, that's a very busy street. There's a lot happening there. Manatar was sparsely populated with regard to houses, not sparsely populated with regard to people. And a lot of that was because there were marakai there. And the land was used for growing things as opposed to living. And you'll see the top right-hand corner there, you'll see some of those marakai. And, mahinga ika, those places that we knew along the coast, which were the places that we collected fish, and we knew the different species and the places to get that. And Tiffany was talking the other day, and I was overhearing it, and it just reminded me of the same stories that I had growing up in Manatar, was that those little dinghies, they look tiny, but you'd see those dinghies disappearing over the horizon. That's how far out our people used to go fishing. And there were big reefs out there. And there was a whole bunch of different species. I remember going out with my father, there's a reef out there, and we used to get porai out there. That was just one of the species, but it was really significant for Ngāti Rangitihi. So here again, you'll see the bottom left-hand corner. People then query about, was Te Awa Te Atua really a port? And that photo shows, yes, it was. And in actual fact, what you'll see in that photo is that there were significant flax mills up the Tarawina River. That flax was baled, scraped and baled, and brought down to Manatar and put on those boats, and those boats would either be going to Auckland or directly to Sydney, and it was turned into flax rope. Top right-hand corner is the old Manatar railway station. You wouldn't even know there was a railway station back then, but it was significant. And top in the middle is one of the things that I'm particularly proud of including within our treaty settlement. So as far as I'm aware, Ngāti Rangitihi's treaty settlement is the only treaty settlement that actually acknowledged First World War veterans in the actual settlement itself. And you'll see from our treaty settlement, there are a number of our men that went to war and either passed away in the war or subsequently when they came home. And it was awful. I mean, I know that my grandmother, my grandaunt, so my grandmother was married to a guy called Dan Savage, who went to the First World War and came back. And he was only back less than a year and he passed away. He had TB, he had a whole bunch of stuff, he had shell shock and all sorts of things. So the impacts on Ngāti Rangitihi in terms of its leadership, both in the eruption, which I'll get to in a minute, and in the First World War, was significant impact on us as an iwi. And so I'm particularly proud of us as an iwi actually having our acknowledgement of our First World War vets within our treaty settlement. And so here, I just want to just briefly touch on, you can read that for yourselves, that tuna, eels, was a primary and sought after food. And in actual fact, Ngāti Rangitihi were known as providing tuna, for its manuhiri. And you'll actually see there's quite a famous painting that we have in the Ngāti Rangitihi office of Hakari at Manatar. And the primary thing you'll notice from that painting is the lines and lines of tuna hanging for the Hakari. And so Ngāti Rangitihi also had a number of pā-tuna up and down the Tarawina River. And as you'll see, Nihe Te Kaipara, one of our kaikorero, talked about the importance of tuna to Ngāti Rangitihi, explaining that tuna was made sacred to prevent anyone else from working there without their consent was not acceptable. And because there was tikanga, there were rules that were laid down to actually manage that resource. We named those places, and we had paurahui and boundary markers established along the Tarawina River to indicate not only that Ngāti Rangitihi had its places, its mahinga kai places, but also to indicate the resource that was being taken. And here you'll see, you won't know that now, but anyone who's ever spent time or lived or raised in Manatar will remember the wooden bridge that went across to what is now the campground. It's a causeway, but it used to be that wooden bridge. And that's where the kids from Manatar used to go down there, and you can see the net that they used to have. You can't do that now. And those fish species are either non-existent in around Manatar Lagoon, or they're not really able to be taken for height. And listening again to Tiffany the other day when we were talking, saying that the local kids, if you could jump off the bridge and into the water and swim to the bank, then you could actually swim in the ocean. Otherwise, you were stuck being on the bridge. So I always just think that's an amazing corridor that we have. Tarawina eruption, so significant. So, Leith touched on very strong and close whakapapa relationships with a number of neighbouring iwi. To Haurangi, we do have very strong whakapapa connections. We also have very strong whakapapa connections to Ngāti Awa. We also have very strong whakapapa connections to Ngāti Tarawhai and to Whare Tōki Kawerau. But nonetheless, of 110 people that were killed at the eruption, over half of those were formally identified themselves as Ngāti Rangitihi. So essentially what happened was after the eruption, those survivors moved to the coastal lands that Ngāti Rangitihi had, and predominantly at Hauane. So that Hauane lands is halfway between Manatar and Otamarako. However, effectively what it originated as a gift from the Prime Minister of the time, Balance. He subsequently died in office, And the Crown Secretary decided in his wisdom that the gifting of haone to Ngāti Rangiti was something that he didn't want to happen. So he forced Ngāti Rangiti into a situation of actually having to exchange their pōkahu lands, which are those lands up by the outlet, for the block at haone. So 63Z, as it's known now, is a significant block, and still actually is 100% owned by Ngāti Rangiti. But effectively, when you come down to about the fifth bullet point there, you'll see in the 1910s, the Crown drained the Rangitaki swamp. So you'll see the first of those was in about 1902, 1903, after that big flood that I was talking to you about, where it rained for a year apparently. That lake, all of that land that was now covered in water had been gifted to the Canterbury Settlers Association. And so it was decided that the Rangitaki River would be drained, or the swamp would be drained, and a big pressman dredge, a big bucket dredge went in at Thornton, and dug out what's the cut for the Rangitaki River now. It was said that in 24 hours, the total water level in the whole of the Rangitaki swamp dropped by a foot in 24 hours, which is, you can just see how significant that was. Then that big pressman dredge came along to Manatar and dug the Tarawina River cut to actually then finish the job. But effectively what it did was it cut off Te Awa, or the Manatar Lagoon as it's known now, from its river sources, and therefore had a significant impact on Ngāti Rangiti's ability to actually collect food and pay. It also had significant impacts on two Ngāti Rangiti urapa, including Otara Muturanga, and the Māori that Leith was talking about Te Awa Tiatua. Tiffany's already touched on the 54 Enabling Act that caused the pollution of the river. And again, you'll see the significant impact on our hapu that were living inland. And you'll see that on the right-hand side, that's Rotomahana before it filled up. So it's a big hole in the ground. It's massive. And so the effects on our people, both physically and psychologically, was significant. And then, we came down to our lands at Manatar, and we're continually writing to the Crown saying, Mohonuirangi wrote, for example, a letter that said, our people are starving, my people are starving, we need more land, we need more resources, and the Crown looked the other way. And this is just the last one here. Now this is just a nice little survey plan, just to show you Te Awa Tiatua, so where the actual outlet or the inlet was, depending on whether you're a academic or not. But access to the former port was lost. I think that mapped something around about 1930, 1927, there it is. So you'll actually see that the outlet was already starting to silt up when that survey plan was done. And you'll see on the right-hand side of that survey plan with the big ink splodge in it, that's where the cut had been put in. And you can see an island that sits just below the top part of that splodge. So that is Orneal Sand Island, but it actually is the site of one of our significant sites we've got back as part of our treaty settlement, which is Awarua.
That way, Anthony. Madam Chair, how much time have we got left, please?
Very little.
I saw Shayla's eyes.
Okay, well, let's get to why we're here. Next slide, please. This is a lot of detail, it's in the Act, but this details the players who are in the Tarawina Awa strategy group. It's made up of 4 iwi, and it's made up of all of the local councils in the Rohe, plus the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. It is said that this is a co-governance group. We do not believe it is because we never thought of this as a co-governance group. All of the players in here were selected for a specific purpose. We believe that the iwi, Ngāti Awa, Ngāti Mākeno, Ngāti Tuwharetoa and ourselves should be able to sit down around the table and say, okay, we've been given the task of restoring the Māori of the Tarawina Awa and Te Awa o Te Atua. We believe it's our responsibility, therefore, to define what Māori means and for our for iwi to determine our aspirations on what restoring the Māori means. For example, a little thing, the Māori of Te Awa Te Atua would never be restored unless there was some trickle of water from the ocean back into the lake, back into the lagoon. It is a stagnant waterway at the moment, and so there's going to have to be some work. Doesn't have to sort of be a place where ships can come in, but there has to be some work in allowing some fresh water to get into that lagoon. And the other thing is you can't be half well. You're either fully well or not at all. So any pollution that is going into the river, either authorised by consent or authorised because the wastewater systems at Manatar, Edgecombe, Tarawina Village are substandard and people need to rectify that. I believe that iwi should be saying to us that we want all of the single point discharge into the river to stop. And why are the councils there? Because they are the ones who are responsible for the wastewater systems. And certainly they're working on that one at Manatar, which is good. But Edgecombe have issues, Tarawina have issues. There has to be some work on rectifying the discharge into the river in Te Awa Te Atua. Now, this is a point that has just come up, Doug, and we won't prolong it this morning, but we are thinking very seriously about going back to the Crown and saying, hey, when we sat down to negotiate with the Crown about how we would set up the strategy group, we were not aware that they were thinking of the Three Waters reforms or the reforms of the RMA. Because nowhere in this group the regional group that I understand is going to have some responsibility for planning and coming up with sort of regional policies for the RMA, or that group that's going to have some of the early decisions at a regional level about putting money into wastewater systems and that sort of thing. And so we are delighted to have you at the table. We're delighted to have the councillors at the table, but we are concerned that the actual decision makers in the reform are not at the table. So can I leave it there? Sorry, we took longer than we had anticipated. What's the other slide? Oh, okay. Oh, yes. There's just one more slide. Next one, the last one. Yes, no, there's another one. Okay. What we'd like to do to get started, and we're working with Tarawina and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, we would like, when the strategy group forms, to have two pieces of work completed. One is to have a current state of the Awa and Te Awa Te Atua, and the second bit is to have a clear statement by the iwi on what they understand to be Māori and what they believe their aspirations are for restoration.
Kia ora. Councillor White.
Kia ora, Ngāti Rangatihi mō tō whakaaturanga ki a mātou I tino pai tō kōrero. Look, again, congratulations on getting to the settlement. Your last comments, I think, are critical comments around how this play out in the future and the role of the four iwi that you've got. It is my considered view that you must take the lead in this particular scenario, and how that evolves, I think, is critical, because without your frontline leadership and directing this, direction, to me personally, it won't succeed without your utmost support and direction. And I just see the other members in that particular group as being enablers of that process. There will be some challenges, no doubt, but those are challenges that should be worked through with the 4 leading iwi groups who are taking the direction in this. That is my view. So congratulations, and putting that point on the table at the end, I think was significant for the ears of council and all the ears of the others involved and the government as well. Kia ora.
Thank you. Thanks.
On my mind, in this order, Councillor Thurston, Councillor Winters,
After the big C.
Chairman Leader, and hopefully Madu at the end. Kia koe Lyle.
Kia ora everyone, and greetings to you, Madam Chair, and very warm greetings to you, Leith, and Tipene and Anthony. A brilliant presentation and a great history lesson for us all, and I hope you're taking this around the traps and sharing it with a lot of people, because a lot of people are ignorant of the history of this particular area, and particularly the impacts that occurred to your people around Tarawina and out to the coast. But no, just full marks for the presentation and your objectives in restoring the Māori of this area. Is it fair to say this is in line with what we've done and tried to achieve at Makatu and Waikokapu? Is that a fair sort of comment? I'll ask Titaru or someone to comment on that. Titaru?
Fair comment.
Yep. But no, I'm all for getting fresh water back into the lagoon. I'll give it all the support I can possibly give. But Tarawina, I note that we as regional councillor, we're delegated authority to administer the forum and the setup and provide secretarial support. Can you just explain a little bit more with regards to our roles and our responsibilities and the fact that we're a cornerstone in all of this? Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor. Yes, so we have been delegated responsibility to do the administration of the Tarawina Restoration Group. We've been in discussions, so we've had several informal discussions. The champion of this forum will be Chris Ingle. I'm in support with my team, supporting this forum. So we are about to do some informal whakawhanaungatanga sessions because of the elections, really. So it's difficult for councils to appoint representatives at this point in time. So we are looking at a establishment date of around December so that we can give time for the elections. But the planning is happening in the background. Kia ora.
Councillor Winters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for the presentation. Leith, I've been on a few, I'm on a few co-governance restoration freshwater of recent, and the most particular one that you'll be familiar with is the Rotorua Lake Strategy Group. When that was formed, there was no dedicated funding. There was no dedicated funding stream from the Crown for that group. And I'm talking about the restoration programs. It wasn't until we were going for about 4 years that the Crown came out and said, here's 72 million to help you with your funding for the restoration work for the lakes. Do you have a dedicated funding stream, A, for the administration to help Bay of Plenty Regional Council, and do you have a dedicated funding stream for the restoration work? Over and out.
The answer to that is partly yes. We're delighted that the Bay of Plenty Regional Council is doing the support work. Excellent decision. And they have, I think it's $750,000, isn't it, that has been allocated for that support?
Yes, so the figure's around about $780,000 has been set aside to support this forum from the Crown. Kia ora.
But we do not have any discretionary money, so therefore we're going to have to talk to the various councils to get them to sort out their wastewater systems, their own what do you call it, stormwater systems, and require that. That's why we want them at the table for them to sign up and do that. And that's why we're interested in the Three Waters reform about who's going to make those decisions. But we think that we have a hook with regard to this is a Crown apology, and they have admitted that there was a breach of the treaty. So I think if we can get our act together and come up with some legitimate ways of restoring the Māori, I have every hope that the influence of the people around the table will be able to get the resources that we need to do that.
And supplementary, Madam Chair, you'll be aware, Leith, that part of the Rotorua-Tiara Lakes Strategy Group was the hook, was that they wanted the lakes restored back to what they were in the 1960s. And the Crown has come up with the subsequent funding. So that's how we're going back to that sort of timeline. So good luck, wish you well, and look forward to working with you in the future. And great to see the settlement claim underway, signed, delivered, and in full support. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Leith, Anthony Tipene. The points you raised about Three Waters reform are absolutely critical. So Three Waters reform, Mr. Crosby, 2023 legislation will be passed and implemented in 24. The issue here is a lot of those consents you referred to expire in 25, 26. The risk is that they're given another tranche of, let's say, argument's sake, another decade. So the Bunsen burner's got to be applied to the new entity B to ensure that those consents get processed in an appropriate timeframe. But then, you know, I'd be interested, I mean, we don't need to discuss it today, but the makeup of the participation of the governing group, if Whakatane Kawerau lose their Three Waters entities, you know, does it change totally to the entity B, or is there still some input from the local authorities? Because under local government reform, their function may well change as well.
No.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the Rangiti settlement, particularly the apology, because it's an act of decree that could be force a few issues. But I go back to the Panaunatanga in the political with Rangiti, express of Tarawa coming from Rangiti. There's a number of incidents that could relate to that. Pākau Tore is a classic example. Pākau Tore is where the long walk on Morukuka went down to Rangiti to arrange marriage. As a consequence, that's how Ngāti and Tapuika link to the Kaituna River down there. That linkage, those are the linkage, that network and support system by way of kith and kinship is highly important. And I would refer back to the 28th Māori Battalion, where they recruited many of the in Maketu. There was two links to that. There was the link with Rangitihi and the links with the Catholic Church, believe it or not, because Manatar was full of Catholics. There was two churches. There was two churches, the Mihinga up the hill and the Catholic down the bottom. And of course, the priest, even the priest was from Manatar. They used to come down. There's not only that, there's the ducks, because Manatar, the wetland there was highly important to the ducks. That when we went out shooting in May, there is plentiful from Manatar. The other fish that used to go up the Kaikoko River was the mullet. Mullet used to breed up there. And the links and connections to that was actually Manatar. And of course, there's a whole lot of restoration that needs to bring back the Māori, or the life force of the birds, the bees, the fish, and the trees. And of course, hopefully your settlement will find that remedy. Kia ora tata.
Kia ora. Thank you. Well, that brought us to the end of our questions.
End of our questions. I do want to mihi to you again. I think it's a great segue into the formation of what it is we're going to be forming based on what you're telling us and what I think needs to be achieved from where you sit. And ka mihi kia koutou. We're in a time of transformational change, and if it's about re-looking at what we've formed in our co-governance partnerships, well, now's the time to do it. So I wanted mihi to you for that, and what I particularly wanted mihi to you about is having that collective discussion with other iwi before coming into council. I don't think we've actually achieved that anywhere in the whole of Toi Moana. So, if Rangitihi can show that and show how it's done, that hopefully it helps to assist others in going down the same pathway. So, kanui mihi kia koutou. Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break. We are running a little behind schedule, but I know you've all been sitting for a while. So instead of a 15-minute break, though, I'm going to give you a 10-minute break, and we will be back on board at 11:17. Kia ora. Kia ora no tātou. We're going to continue our hui. Our next presentation is with Nick Newman, our Principal Advisor, talking on climate change update. Kia koe, Nick.
Thank you, Atamaria councillors. We've got myself getting a brief précis of a report that I've written, and then the highlight of the show is some external presenters, which I'd like to introduce to you shortly. We've got Akawata Bailey-Winiata, who's a PhD student at Waikato University. He's going to speak to you on some of his research. And online, we've got Tarawina Bennett, who's been leading one of the community-led climate adaptation projects in the region. So I'll work through this paper pretty quickly, take any questions, and then we can move on to our external presenters. So, as you know, since declaring climate emergency, you've got a climate action plan with a number of projects and goals in it. I'm going to speak to some specific work we're doing funded under the LTP, which relates to the third and fourth goals around climate adaptation. So, Council's doing a lot of work in its business as usual, integrating climate adaptation into our natural hazards work, into our freshwater planning, into our land management work. But specifically, we've got three pieces of work which we've got funded. The first one is where it makes sense to, we're helping with a regional view around climate change. So there are some certain regional things that we can do that are really useful to our region. We've, as you know, we work with NIWA to downscale national climate projections for our region. So we've got a report on projections for our region. We've got a summary video for our region. We've also recently produced some interactive maps. People could go onto our website and they can zoom into their location and different variables such as hot days or growing degree days or rainfall, and see how that changes with climate change for their location. So that's part of that regional picture which we're helping to create. Following that understanding of the climate projections for our region, we're working with Tonkin and Taylor on a regional risk assessment. So this is what's coming, this is what's at risk from a regional perspective. So they are currently full steam ahead with this regional risk assessment. It's following the national guidelines which came out of MFE last year on doing regional risk assessments. They will probably have that completed in Q4 of this year. So it'll be on the agenda for the next council. And at the moment, they are involved in a whole lot of expert workshops where they're doing the technical assessment around those climate risks. So how we're thinking of this is a resource for the region. So it'll be at a regional level. It can be picked up by any parties to start adaptation planning based on the risk assessment, particularly territorial authorities. They can take the technical inputs, they can take the risk assessment and then come down to that more specific local level in terms of their own assessments. So we'll get to that point where we're getting really good regional information that can get dropped down to the other levels. We also have we're looking, as well as having that technical risk assessment, we're trying to bring in the Te Māori perspective into that assessment document. And so at the moment, there's a small working group who's working with Tonkin and Taylor on that through some case studies to bring those other perspectives around the concepts of climate risk. I guess as well as thinking about a regional view and that technical stepwise approach, we know that there are some communities who are noticing the climate changing, they're ready to take action, they don't need a kind of top-down stepwise approach. And so we put funding into the last LTP of $70,000 a year to support community-led climate adaptation. We've established the funding guidelines and principles and assessment criteria all around that, and we've had 5 projects funded so far, which are underway. It's open to any community group which are place-based, which are ready to start to understand and think about climate change at their local level. Not by design, but the first 4 projects are all coastal hapu. And the 5th project is an inland group, all hapu iwi based. It's I think kind of had a feeling that and because we're learning as we're going, right? Everybody's learning as they're doing this, that adaptation is going to be very place-based, it's going to be very nuanced to place, and in particular in our region, coastal Papu, they're obviously so connected to place and so connected to changes to that place that they were the first ones to put up their hands to lead projects. And Rowana will talk to their project when we get to that item. So yeah, 5 projects funded thus far. We've got the round open again until the end of October for the next round of projects. The third thread, as I think of it in terms of the climate adaptation work we're doing, is we've got Responsibilities Regional Council where we own those assets, manage those assets, being our river schemes. So more frequent extreme events, more intense extreme events, and sea level rise mean that we need to think about how resilient our schemes are going to be into the future as the climate changes. Just die. What we're doing is we've got a project looking at the river schemes at the moment. The Waiaweka Otara scheme is where there is work going on in terms of the initial meetings with Opotiki District Council and 2 river hapu on the Waiaweka and Otara. So that's going to be a process across a number of years to work with the community to understand what change might be coming and then how we manage that change with the way we manage the scheme. And other river schemes will follow the Waiaweka Otara scheme. With the Rangataiki, we've managed to jump ahead with some of that funding we got around the floodway project. That's a quick précis on that piece. In terms of in the paper, I have tried to capture in the implications for Māori section about some things that we've heard along the way in our interactions and as part of doing the risk assessment of the climate community-led projects. Some of the things, and other people more qualified, like Ohata and Rowana, can speak to this, but we've heard about the climate risks not just being those physical risks, but spiritual risks for Māori as well. So risks not only to cultural sites, but to cultural practice, because the identity is tied to the environment and changes to the environment, therefore brings about change to identity or challenges to identity. We also know, of course, that iwi, a lot of iwi livelihoods are based around natural resources. And so climate change will affect those natural resources, which in turn affects those livelihoods. I've said there are no financial implications from this paper, which is correct, but I have drawn your attention to the fact that who pays for major climate interventions is not resolved. You know that, but I'm just drawing your attention to it. We think that the Climate Adaptation Act, government has indicated that will have some discussion around responsibilities. We know the future for local government will recommend what local government does and how it pays for it, and adaptation needs to be part of that. So there are a lot of pieces in the air still around who pays. And as a regional sector, we've been quite firm with central government in terms of providing case studies around co-investment and flood protection, which I know that they're considering through a case study of Westport. That's all I wanted to do in terms of a quick look through the focus of our work, but really the key thing now is just to set the scene for Akahata, who's one of the leading researchers in the country, I think, in terms of adaptation and Māori space, and Rowana, whose community-led project, I think, is going to be a bit of a leading light around the country as well. And happy to take questions from you.
Thank you. I guess to enable us to run with our timing of our committee, I'm going to suggest that we roll into the presenters and that we have a question time at the end of that. Okay? Thank you. Okay.
Can you hear me? Oh, cool. Sorry, I've never presented in a situation like this, so it's a bit nerve-wracking, but we'll get there. So kia ora koutou, ko koutou Bailey Winnie atu tōku ingoa, PhD student at the University of Waikato, looking specifically at adaptation to sea level rise of our coastal marae nationally. So if you could put my slide up, please.
Cool.
So yes, my PhD, it's based at University of Waikato. I also have quite a few supervisors that are split between Waikato University as well as Auckland University, and my PhD is funded through the Resilience to Nature's Challenges, which is one of the national science challenges. Yeah. Okay, cool. So ko waiaho, koaka te Tarawina te tuku ingoa. Originally from Rotorua, born and bred. One of my marae is Tonohopu and Ohinemotu, as well as I have some Irish and Scottish connections as well. The picture on the right is of me when I first graduated. I was the first of my whānau to attend university full stop. I was the first to graduate, the first to do my master's, and now the soon-to-be first doctor in our whānau. So that's my mum and dad. They're pretty chuffed about my achievements, but if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here today. So just paying homage to my whānau today. So yes, my PhD and pretty much most of my tertiary education has been about climate change and the impacts at our coastlines, specifically sea level rise. This image here just shows the sheer expanse that climate change impacts. You know, we have melting permafrost up in the Arctic regions. We have rising sea levels, polar bears going extinct, so many impacts that scientists, researchers, communities are having to deal with on a day-to-day basis, which is going to grow as we progress with increased emissions. Specifically sea level rise. So this diagram here is just a complication of different ways that sea levels can rise, but most specifically here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, extreme sea level. So sea level rise with storm surges, cyclone activity. We have rises in sea level due to vertical land movement. So recently the NZ Sea Rise Project brought out their new data, which looked at the influence of changes in vertical land movement. So if the land is rising, the sea level drops. If the land is subsiding, the sea level rises. And that can have impacts in different areas. So for example, in Wellington, there's sinking, which means that sea level rise will be enhanced in that region. Some sort of projections around global mean sea level rise. So the RCPs have been replaced by SSPs, but RCPs are representative concentration pathways, which are dictated by certain increases in emissions of greenhouse gases. So this map here is, this graph shows some predictions of sea level rise under the lowest scenario of RCP 2.5. I think I can't quite see 2.6. That's the lower rate of emissions under those scenarios compared to RCP 8.5, which is often termed the business as usual scenario. Sea level rise are expected to go through the roof under that scenario. So yeah, as scientists, this is what we work with in terms of understanding what sea level rise can look like and the impact that it's going to have. So what does sea level rise mean back here in Aotearoa? Our marae, our urupa at the coast are being impacted by flooding, erosion with sea level rise. Here are just some instances in the news where marae have been flooded, or urupa quite recently in the Gisborne region was impacted by storm surges and the urupa was being eroded into the ocean. So all of these are really the building blocks of what is happening at the moment, and to show why research in this area is so important, particularly looking at what do we do to protect these marae and urupa from sea level rise. So this formulated my master's project. It actually started off as a summer research internship at the university, which looked at proximity of marae, but the master's thesis really honed in on that. So we had three key objectives. The first objective was using GIS, Geographical Information System. What does the exposure to sea level rise look like, specifically to a 100-year flood event? You often hear that in the news, you know, a 100-year flood event is happening now, that sort of thing. We also looked at understanding elevation, distance to the coast, as well as the topography. Topography is sort of the shape of the land from the marae to the coastline. To understand if it's say a low topography with not much relief, that means that sea level rise could be more pressing in that situation. Second objective was to conduct a geomorphological analysis. So I have an earth science background. So geomorphology basically means what type of coastline are you? I'll be digging more into that later. And the third objective, what potential legislation is relevant to adaptation for coastal marae. Now, this was done in 2020 where there was just little discussions of the RMA reform coming through. And now with those potential changes in legislation, what does that look like for adaptation, particularly for coastal marae? So a bit of some results, if it wants to change. There you are. So yeah, GIS mapping. So the map on your left shows the national scope of marae being coastal. So that means within 1 kilometre of the coastline. We had 191 coastal marae, and as you can see, they're pretty spread all over the place. The map on the right, that is the exposure map. So these are the marae that are exposed to 100-year flood event. And the interesting thing about this map as well is that we have imposed sea level rise increments. So I believe the red dots are those marae that are exposed at current mean sea level. So that means sea level rise hasn't even been factored into those estimates. And as you increase up to the yellow dots, they're the ones who are exposed at those higher ranges of sea level rise. As you can see, there are about 40 odd marae that were impacted, that are potentially exposed to 100-year flood event. The key thing about this analysis, though, is that it only looked at flooding. However, in the slide earlier showing the different cases in the media around marae being impacted by sea level rise, erosion is a big factor in terms of impact. So these results so far are only showing flooding, but what does the case look like once we include erosion? And that's where I'm heading with my PhD, but I'll come back to that later on. I also talked about the geomorphology. So what type of coastline are you? Are you on the open coast where you're dominated by wave impacts? Or are you within an estuary where tidal fluctuations are much more prominent in those systems? Geomorphology dictates what type of management is undergone. So for instance, a shallow drowned valley, there's often termed estuaries. We found 72 coastal marae are found in these systems, and that was the most dominant system type for coastal marae. Here we have Tarawina River, which is an example of a shallow drowned valley. Within these systems, sea level rise can be seen with an increase in overland flooding, as well as changes in mahinga kai spatial extent. So that means with certain species require that intertidal fluctuation. With sea level rise, that basically becomes subtidal, and those species will have to relocate in order to sustain that intertidal fluctuations, which can have an impact on mahinga kai access and that sort of thing. Another coastal type is a coastal embayment, often termed pocket beaches or coves. We found 41 coastal marae within these systems. Now these are characterised with headlands at either end, which constrain wave entry into these systems. So that's with sea level rise, those wave directions can change. So which means within these systems, if it's eroding at one end and accreting at the other end, say a marae is at the accretion end, so the shoreline is growing, with sea level rise, those systems could change, meaning that that marae could potentially now be experiencing erosion instead of accretion. So understanding the geomorphology, as you can see, is so variable, but it's important because we need to know what management strategies do we need to take into account, what adaptation needs to be undergone for each marae. As Nick mentioned earlier, adaptation will be place-based. It's going to have to happen at the local scale. Having this understanding is really leading us to more better adaptation to undergo, really. So through my master's, I had so many engagements with marae, particularly here in Tauranga Moana. And some key questions are, is erosion more of an issue, as I mentioned earlier? What about relative sea level rise, so the changes in vertical land movement? What does that mean for our marae in terms of sea level rise? What are the impacts our marae and people are likely to experience? And how does this affect the next generation? That was the biggest question I got asked. And as a master's student, that was a really hard question to answer because I'm like, I don't know. Climate change is so uncertain and we can't make clear distinctions of what that's going to look like, but we can be sure with science to enable some sort of understanding. And also probably the biggest question I got asked was, what do we do and when do we do it? Again, real elephant in the room type question. Everyone wants to know who pays, but we just need more research to find out those answers. So this is where my PhD comes in, particularly looking at adaptation of marae, but particularly managed retreat, the relocation in terms of sea level rise. What does that look like? And it's quite time with the RMA reform bringing in the CCA, looking at managed retreat and how that can be done for coastal communities. A bit more about my PhD background. So I'm a year, oh no, not quite a year, I'm a year in October with a 3-year PhD. So the forming of my PhD really started to look at the literature, specifically the science side, the Indigenous knowledges, Indigenous communities side, and then bringing those two in the middle at that interface of the two knowledge systems. What does that look like? Because, like we said, those local adaptation strategies are going to need to be done locally, but we need to bring all the information, all the knowledges that we have at our disposal to bring them together to meet those positive outcomes of the future. Some influential words that I found, particularly this is all academic stuff. I heard earlier you guys hear a lot of academic presentations, so sorry, this is one, but I'm trying my hardest to make it not academic. Anthropogenic climate change is an intensification of environmental changes imposed on Indigenous by colonisation by coal white. That really resonated to me in terms of the origins of climate change. Some more, Indigenous communities cannot separate relocation or retreat from land confiscations, forced removals. Those two things are synonymous, and we need to be cognizant of that in order to undergo ethical adaptation in the future. And one I really honed in on was from Mason Jury, who talked about the research at that interface, bringing all the knowledges that we have at our disposal, bring them together to deliver on those outcomes for all communities, not just one, not just the other, all of them. So again, coastal adaptation. So there's this thing called the paradigm, which looks at protection, avoiding, retreat or accommodate. I said that not in the order that the images are shown, but kei te pai. So adaptation is effective when all adaptation measures are considered together. So often you'll hear, oh, we want to build a seawall, or we want to undergo managed retreat, and we don't want to undergo any other form of adaptation. But the literature says internationally and nationally that when we have this single-minded view of adaptation, outcomes in the future are more negative. So we need to consider all adaptation options at our disposal. And that's why in the National Adaptation Plan, you hear the language in there, not managed retreat, adaptation options, including managed retreat, to say managed retreat isn't the option, it is one of many options that we need to consider in order to deliver on outcomes that the community wants. So a bit more about the PhD thesis. So it's really centered on the idea of time in a Te Ao Māori perspective. We look to the past to understand how we can make decisions in the present to move forward into the future for those future generations. Centered around the whakatauki, he whakatamuri te haere whakamoa, we look backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on the past. So we want to look to the histories of managed retreat, relocation of marae to understand how we can undergo that. So the first chapter is looking at the historical perspective. The second chapter is a systematic review. What does the international literature say? The third one is to improve the mapping, improve our understanding of the exposure. And the last chapter is to bring it all together and co-develop something, some form of a managed retreat strategy that's effective for coastal marae, hapu and iwi. First chapter, I'm just going to glance through these. So yes, this is understanding what is the historical examples of pa, marae, urupa, etc., relocating in response to natural hazards. So I've found quite a few examples just in the textual data, 41 cases of pa adapting or considering adapting in terms of hazards, and 29 of these have undergone some form of relocation. So these are compiled, these are found through the grey literature, the treaty settlement records, Māori maps, media, everything that I could find online or in the literature to support these claims. So this is quite promising because a lot of the conversations I've had with hapu and iwi is that they haven't had a history of relocating, so they're a bit closed off from the idea in a way. They're like, we haven't undergone this form of relocation before, so we're a bit uncertain of how that works. So if we can bring these stories to light to say, you know, this has happened before, we can look to these stories to understand how it can happen again if it is deemed the right decision to undergo. I keep pressing that thing because often when you're talking about managed retreat, people often think that you only think managed retreat will be the only option for you, but it's not. There's so many others that we need to consider and be aware of. Second chapter is the systematic review, which is looking at the international literature through a systematic process. So some key results so far. Started with 544 individual papers. I narrowed that down to 91, which were relevant to our research question. And some key things that came up about what is the adaptation challenge that Indigenous people are facing in terms of climate change and sea level rise was place attachment. How do we maintain that connection to place if relocation is deemed the right option for us? The importance of bottom-up approaches from the community level upwards is really important. Also, the who pays, that's the biggest question I get asked all the time, and I don't know the answer. It's going to come out as time progresses in terms of who pays. Indigenous knowledges, how can we use all the knowledge we have at our disposal? Community engagement and multi-stakeholder involvement. I'm pretty sure that's pretty standard across the board in terms of engaging of communities. Some pictures of some certain adaptations here around the world. So the top two images are from Southeast Asia, where it's actually a traditional method of building their houses is up on stilts because a lot of Southeast Asia is low-lying. So their traditional knowledge has been at play for so many years. So using that as a proxy to understand what we can do. Third one is understanding their exposure, so bringing in that information around vertical land movement, as well as the exposure to coastal erosion to deepen our understanding of what the situation looks like. And fourth is the co-development of the framework. What does this look like? What needs to be included? Comparing it to the RMA reform, what does that look like? Where can we learn from the RMA reform, or where can the RMA reform learn from this framework? Okay, we're nearing the end. Future plans, PhD funding ends October 2024. A lot of PhD people go over their time, but that's when I'm finishing. I've said that in my head, that I'm finishing when the funding ends, but we'll see what happens. Manuscript for chapters 1 and 2 will be coming out soon, and also continue that co-development of that framework. And compare and contrast with RMA reform. And beyond PhD, wanting to work overseas to understand, you know, the global Indigenous struggle in terms of climate change and adaptation. So that's me. I don't know if I rushed through that or not, but Namhi, thank you. And I guess we'll leave questions for the end, eh?
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation, excellent. Just to keep us moving again and don't go away, we're going to move on to your next provider.
Thank you, Tarawina. There you are. She's online. So have you got your presentation ready to go? Kia ora, Tarawina.
Kia ora, I'll hand over to Hemi to kick us off.
You're on mute, Hemi, and just give us a yell when you want us to advance the presentation slide by slide.
Is that better? Tāpai. Tētahi mihi tāne kia tātou nei, kia koutou I raru te marumaru tō tātou maunga mauao, I waho nei te moana o tauranga. Tēnei mihi kane ki tēnā whare tūake anei whakaruru hau, ara o toi moana, o te rā kia koutou kai karakia, kia koe te hea mana whaia, tēnā koe, o te rā kia koutou katoa ngā kauni hera e hui mai ana I te ata nei. Tēnā koutou mihi kane kia koutou mai a mātou, kua kohi a wenei ngā mahi I maki tū no te runanga o Ngāti Whakaue ki maki tū, ki tai, no te roku Ngāti Pikiao ki tai, no te ngā kaitiaki o te marae hoki maki tū, I whakatū ai wenei hotaka kei mui a tātou nei. Kia kite ai i ngā tinihanga me ngā huringa o te Ahuarangi. Ki te takutai moana o Makitu, me ngā tinihanga ki ngā hauropi, ngā rauropi, wahapu, ngā repo, te wai kawakawatanga, o te moana, me te pikinga o te wai, me te mahana o te wai. E porere ana wene mea kia mātou nei, o te rā kia tātou, nō reire mihi koni kia koutou, kia whai huarahi i rungi tēnei kaupapa, tēnā koutou. Kia ora everybody. Big mihi to the Tony Hera, and a big mihi to all of the kai kōrero that were speaking before us. Really impressed and pleased to be here today. Feel very privileged. We'd like to share some of the work that we've done with the council and with our kāinga and Makitu concerning the effects of climate change and strategies and plans to move ahead to help to mitigate those things. But what seemed really important to us was to lay down that cultural foundation. And as a part of that, we grew to understand and then discuss and wānanga those impacts to do with our cultural connections to the people and place, our cultural connections to the taiao and Makitu, our whakapapa and identity and our wairua, those impacts and effects upon us in terms of our mātauranga and our connection to those parts of mātauranga that connect us to the taiao, i.e. whakatauki and pepeha and so on. Our rangatiratanga as ahika, and also our tūranga wāwai, our marae, but also the hauora of our people. So tēnā koutou, I'll pass it on to Roana and she can describe it through. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, he mihi anō kia koutou, raurangatira mā. It's our absolute pleasure to be presenting to you today the aspirations that and the rest of the community of Makitu have in terms of tackling the climate change challenge that is coming barreling at us down the line. My presentation is reasonably short, but I want to start. Can you see the presentation? Yep. Hi. So in terms of our connection to place, our climate change adaptation strategy is anchored by whakaparore, which is the rock, the anchor stone of Te Arawa Waka. Te toka tūmoana a takaparore he ākina nā ngā tai. There stands the seafaring anchor stone takaparore, a resilient barrier to the tides. So although our waka is long, takaparore remains in place, and we see ourselves as takaparore, strong and steadfast against the tides of change and uncertainty that is climate change. Our why. Why did we do this? There are many different ways to explain the why. Our world is changing in ways that we are unable to predict accurately, and it's even harder to figure out ways to influence the change that's coming. Our marae is right on the edge of the estuary. It's an irrefutable truth that our marae will be impacted negatively by climate change. There's a lot of mamae when we talk about the possibility of having to relocate our marae, but it's a conversation that we need to have, and we've started. But most of all, our why is centred around our tamariki, our mokopuna, with a view of our mokopuna's mokopuna. The photo on the right-hand side is one of our mokopuna. Climate change impacts are irreversible, with 40% of the world's population vulnerable. We believe we've adapted before, and we can, because we've adapted before, we can adapt again. With the assistance of the grant from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, we developed our own process to put together a climate change adaptation plan for Makitu. We held 5 wānanga. The first one was an iwi only wānanga. We felt that we needed to build a strong iwi collective before we took it any wider. And we were fortunate that the iwi within Makitu, who are diverse and many, they all came and contributed their ideas. In the end, as we moved forward through the process, The planning, the wānanga was led by Te Runanga o Ngāti Whakaue ki Maketu, the trustees of the Whakaue Marae, and Ngāti Pūkeo ki Tai. Our second wānanga was a Climate Change 101, where we were fortunate to have access to Justin Ford Robertson, who has acted globally on issues of climate change and sustainability. We felt this was necessary because in whatever group you're talking to there, everyone's on a continuum in terms of their understanding of the science behind climate change and the impacts. So we spent a day doing Climate Change 101. The third wānanga, we invited our partners. And so Nick and his team, Jody and the team from council, and other groups attended, and we asked them to lay down their current knowledge, understanding and data around climate change impacts on Maketu. And so with those resources, we were then able to go into our fourth wānanga, that was the hard one, where we workshopped the key themes and started nutting out what our plan would be. The fifth wānanga was a celebration as much as anything and an opportunity to sign off and finalise what our priorities are. So before we went any further, because we're diverse, number of iwi and Maketu, a broad community, we began with our values. So our primary value was around rangatiratanga, self-determination, that the Maketu community will be resilient for Maketu. We are capable and we can work together to do this. Ko tahitanga, working together, very important, vital. Tikanga, we will do things in the right way and for the right reasons. Māramatanga, we value knowledge and truth about the changes that are facing Maketu. Manaakitanga, we take care of each other, especially our most vulnerable. Kaitiakitanga, we actively care for our kaiao and all that it sustains. Whanaungatanga, we recognise the many ways in which we connect to each other and to the kaiao, and this is our fundamental strength. We developed a strong vision for Maketu. Me toka tū tonu tātou. The Maketu community is prepared for, can adapt and will be resilient to a changing climate. And from that, we developed 5 strategic priorities, 12 projects, and 7 enabling actions. I'm just going to give you an insight into some of this. These are our strategic priorities. Hau maru maru, security and self-sufficiency. Number 1, making sure that we are safe, that our water continues, our roads are there, our civil defence is in place. Te puna mātauranga, collective knowledge and wisdom. Having a hub, a way of bringing all of that data and knowledge together. Manaaki kainga, caring for our home. Manaaki whenua, caring for our lands. And Manaaki wai, caring for our waters. From that come our 12 projects. We want to develop a Maketu community emergency response plan. We want Maketu-based food, gardens and tree nursery. We want to develop a Maketu circular economy. We want a Maketu infrastructure assessment. We want Maketu climate resilient homes. We want a Maketu spatial mapping and planning process. We need to start planning for managed retreat. We want more climate change research and monitoring that's Maketu specific. We want to keep going on what has already begun in terms of the tree planting and the wetland restoration. We want a Maketu climate change education program. We want a Maketu climate change information hub. And we want Maketu land use change project. Now we've already started on many of these projects. You'll know that there's a number of groups that will put their hands up and say, we're doing this in this space. So the aim is to support people that have already started, encourage people that want to get started, partner with those outside of Maketu and basically just get this done. So that's in a nutshell what we've done. I'll stop sharing now. And in terms of moving forward, what's really important is the connections and collaboration that we have with people like yourselves. So I'll leave the presentation there, and if anyone wants any further information, you're welcome to ask either myself or Hemi questions.
Kia ora koutou anō. I'm applauding all three presentations, excellent presentations. Receiving the presentations, maybe the order that we should have gone, that I'm thinking now should have been Ruana, Akuata, and you rounding up from the perspective of council as how do we then go behind and support. But that's great. I'm going to stop there so I can open the floor to questions. And Councillor Lees has had her hand up for some time. Jane, is that a hand up?
Thank you. It's so long I've always got a question. But, firstly, I'd just like to congratulate the presenters. That was just awesome, and I think that we need to be getting that thinking happening across all of our communities, and particularly those actions that you've identified in Makatu, which are already underway. Incredibly well done. My question is really going right back to the regional risk assessment and the proposal that be presented to the mayoral forum first. And I'd like to request of staff that surely that we, as the regional governance for the Bay of Plenty, should see that first and know what's going to be presented to the mayoral forum before it goes to them. If it's a timing matter, I'm sure we've got plenty of meetings that we could tack on a presentation, but I would really not like that to be presented to the wider mayoral forum without us having seen it first. Thank you.
I would respond to that. That most certainly is the plan. So maybe I wasn't clear, but following a presentation to council was what I meant to say.
Councillor White.
Kia ora koutou, excellent presentations. Nick, you concluded your presentation by saying who pays. So we're looking at the sort of resources required. Well, the reality is we all pay. If we do not, in my view, have cross-party agreements on how we're going to adapt. Because when I look at your presentation, Akuata, and congratulations, and your family should be rightly proud of you. The impacts diagram that you put up, you're 2.7 degrees by the end of the century. And that basically getting close to 3 degrees is environmental refugees, food shortages, all sorts of things. The islands are gone. Those sorts of predictions are frightening. And when I look at it, and when I look at climate adaptation, I think from a human point of view, are we simply scratching an itch? Because basically native cycles, global warming and freeze, moves in cycles, and we're in cycles of thousands of years. So it is a frightening future. And I think the adaptation issue about mobilization, you mentioned that some of our people with Māori don't know and haven't, how to move and these sorts of things. Pre-colonial times, they always moved. You look around the world, indigenous populations, they moved with nature. They work with nature, not against it. And unfortunately, over the last couple of 100 years, we have not worked with nature and done our best to understand that. Therefore, we are stuck with fixed positions that are going to be extremely difficult to move. So when I look at here on those floodplains, on the plains of Paingaro and others, where we may be planning to extend populations, that'll be done with a great deal of difficulty if we don't realise some of the stuff here. Moving a marae, yes, absolutely. But our people are mobile. And moving a marae, in my view, if you have to move, you move. And that's what we've always done. So I want to congratulate you. It's more of a comment than anything else, but I think the information here is real and behoves the likes of the regional councils to really, really pay attention to climate change action and adaptation in particular. And actually look again at our plans, our 10-year long-term plans and other plans are not long-term in the context of what we're facing here. So I just, back to the point, I did my sciences at Waikato in the early 70s and followed up at Victoria and did a lot of things around the faults and the up-throw and down-throw situations. And I concur with you, that's going to play a part, but ultimately, all parts of the coastline, all parts of our country will need to have an absolute plan that sees us a plan for retreat in many areas. So With that, I just want to congratulate you. I mean, this is a subject close to me because, you know, I have worked in some of this space before, but I just want to say, carry on your good work. But I do believe it goes beyond what I can move and will move and will have to move. So, but it's a question of the big cities that are going to be a problem and our islands. Kia ora.
Team leader.
Similarly, Akahata, could I acknowledge the very pragmatic and realistic way in which you're approaching your PhD? You are one of the few people that I think has put on the table the interaction between sea level rise and geology, in which we face here in New Zealand. So a couple of questions. New Zealand's a relatively young country in terms of geological movement and the shifting in terms of the plates. Are we in the South Pacific here more exposed to the sea level rise traded off with the geological movement relative to parts of, say, Europe, Australia, where the geology is much older? And secondly, you raised the issue of who pays. Look, I think we've got to be really honest with each other here. As you said, marae have moved. Some marae have moved over centuries. No one paid them to move. They took the pragmatic step and moved themselves. And I think ultimately, if there's an expectation that dwellings, someone should pay them to move, you've really got to understand the cost of that, because I think, and I've said before, the most expensive real estate is the closest to the water. Those people do that in full knowledge of the warnings that they get. And if we think we can afford as an economy to pay these people to move, then I think it should be caveat emptor.
Thank you for your two questions. The first one, in terms of New Zealand being more exposed because of our geological history, I think we are, because when you look at continental masses like North America and Europe, they're a different type of geology. They're much more older geology there, which don't have much activity, shall we say. Hence, relative sea level rise, so the changes in vertical land movement, is not as much of an issue in those continental masses like Europe and North America. But back here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, it is. And we need to be a witness to that and include those estimates into our what we do in terms of adaptation and factoring in that vertical land movement. The second question about who pays, yeah, I totally agree. I think the issue of who pays is a difficult one. You talked about marae relocating, that no one paid them to relocate, but oftentimes those instances, it was different in terms of the economy. They had land that they could move to. They didn't need someone to pay them to move. They had their own means to do it. Whereas now, a lot of marae don't have land that they can move to. So that's where that who pays conversation is really going to come into play, because often marae don't have land to move to. All the land they have is what their marae is on. So we need to, yes, it shouldn't be a case of who pays, but in some cases, who pays is going to be the question. I think that was all the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Got any other questions?
Just one comment I want to add, and just really it's something that Roana touched on, and that I guess for those coastal marae who are looking at possibly having to retreat, it is a mamae conversation, I've got to say. 3 of my marae in Tarawina River are highly impacted, one of them being on the foreshore of the Tahuna o Rangatawa, and it is a very painful conversation to have. Okay, for those of us who are sitting okay, but you know, it's work in progress. So if we can look at you about providing that info of the alternative, because unless we go down that track with our kaumatu and kuia, they will not move. They will not move. And it may be a matter of time when we can actually do that. But at this point in time, where our kuia kaumatu are very strong amongst us, it's still a no. Kia ora.
I just reply to that. Yeah, I totally agree. The mamae is real, and the conversations don't want to happen. But I always remind myself, because sometimes as a researcher or scientist, you often objectively put yourself outside of the situation, you forget the mamae that a lot of marae are feeling. So I always try to bring that back to my head and say, this is real for so many people, and I need to be aware of that realness, right? So thank you, Kia ora.
Can I make a brief statement? It's just in the context of, for me, most of my decision-making and thoughts are around the Manatar event and Awatarariki and the managed retreat, when we actually have that catchment that had that adverse weather comment, and the lessons learned from the attitudes of the people that prevailed, that wanted to re-establish. And finally, the old girl, dear old Pam Wally, was going to die in the ditch until push came to shove, and she did move. And I just think that when we are planning, we should actually constantly refer back to Manatar, managed retreat, the cost and the implications, particularly the implications that go around the catchments that sit behind there. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned going forward on that, and we should just keep referring to them. Cheers.
Councillor Rose, I can see your hand up, and followed by Councillor White.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And aki hata, ka mihi nui ki a koe e hoa. Looking at your map and your presentation, 4 of my marae down south popped up, being Taumatu, Ōnuku, Kaukararata and Rāpaki. All 4 popped up, and I went, oh, here we go again. But my partai to you would be in and around, I'm just trying to word this properly, kind of the treaty settlement side of things. Do you feel that there should be a kōrero with those who have already settled, but also, well, with all iwi, but particularly those who have already settled, who are under this constraint as such of having their marae in certain areas that will be impacted by climate change? Do you believe a conversation with them between iwi and the Crown is a valid call in regards to if there is a need to relocate? I don't know if
It's a very good question, and I think yes, there should be opportunity to talk about this between the Crown during and Hapuniwi who have already settled in the past. There's this thing in the literature called transformational retreat, and that's looking at managed retreat through a transformational lens, particularly looking at the possibility of redress of historical wrongs. So I think there is space in there to redress for Hapuniwi who have already settled through the treaty settlement process in terms of retreat relocation, what that looks like. So I think definitely that is possible and should happen. But again, this hasn't been done before, so we're sort of sailing into uncharted territory when we start looking at that process and aspect. A good question. Thank you for asking it.
Thank you. Now, last question from Councillor White.
Yeah, it's just a comment around sort of migration patterns. Might be interesting from an academic point of view. 15 to 20,000 years ago, there seems to have been mass migrations of populations going across the Bering Strait into the Americas, down from Southeast Asia, down south to Polynesia. And that seems to have been about 15 to 20,000 years, which is getting down to the tail end of a glacial period. Freeze, so you can assume that they may have been chasing warmer climates. So people were adapting at that change and moving. So that's one point. The other point that I want to make is around aggradation. So it's not just about sea level rise, I would assume, because everything takes its marker from the sea level. And so rivers are great, they go back to the headwaters, and everything else is impacted upon, no matter where you are along that chain. And I just want to ask you, is that correct in that assumption? Because it isn't about just simply the sea level. Sea level is the base plate. So that in itself. But the other thing that interests me is we talk about extinction of big animals, but insects make up a huge population, and their migration pattern is going to be influenced by changes in weather, changes in wind patterns, and so on. And even the pandemics that we experience right now, those sorts of things are also impacted, I would argue, by weather, by climate change. So I think we're in I hate to frighten everybody, but it's just my personal view, and I'd like your comment on certainly the aggregation impact, because rivers come into it. We're right into the tributaries, going right back to the lakes, and so on. What's your comment?
Yeah, for sure. Accretion, aggregation is an important process that needs to be factored in. But the problem with that is modeling aggregation and getting data around the rates of aggregation is really complicated. And there's not a lot out there in terms of looking at the aspect and the impact that that could have on sea level rise impacts. But I think it's a valid point that we need to start looking at, potentially if we want to understand the holistic view of Marae being exposed or whatever is it exposed. Having that deep understanding is going to be helpful heading into the future. Yeah, I think that was your only question. Okay, cool.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, Mike.
Yeah, you made a comment of Te Turu ai tātou i ngā wā o muri, hei whakatika. I take that to mean that you've got to look back to the past to create the future. And if you took the Māori worldview, there's provisions for Western science and Māori worldview to take place. If we go back to our worldview, we say that we'll end up at Hawaii Pāmamao, that's the rest, where we came from and where we will end up. We created our gods in Hawaii Roa, Maui, Kupe, and all those gods, Haumai Tikitiki. Those gods were created there. And those gods were created based on the environment. In Hawaii was the first global warming, and we learnt all our knowledges from that first global warming. We sent Maui to discover the south, and then we followed it. We followed Maui. And our metaphorical story is that our tupuna had fished up the fish through Maui. And we also sent Kupe south, and he followed the wheke, the octopus. Centuries later, they found out that a breeding place for wheke was opposite the madhouse down Pururua. That's where Maui threw the line in the water and fished up the North Island. Yeah. So when we returned there, we bade farewell to the dead and we tell them turn their heads to their maunga all the way back to Hawaii. So there's a lot of environmental history behind that. And if your scientific knowledge has taken into account that Māori worldview, because there's a number of issues that arises that relates to the global warming. I just wondered if you have taken that into account.
For sure. Migration and global warming has happened in the past so many times, and I think we need to be aware of that. But the issue, not an issue, but those sorts of stories are locked in orally, right? They're oral stories, and oftentimes you need to have real in-depth engagement with the hapu iwi who have those stories in order to have access to them. Then it brings in complications to our sovereignty and those sorts of things. But I think there's real value in looking to those oral histories, particularly to give a sense of resilience and adaptability, right? In terms of our tupuna experience adverse conditions or environmental changes of the past, and they made do and they reacted in a way to sustain themselves, because that's how we got here, right? Because our tupuna were able to sustain themselves and future generations could prosper. And I think honing in on those concepts of resilience, dynamic change, etc., is useful to help our understanding of how we react in the future. At the moment, my research isn't looking at oral histories because it requires the in-depth understanding. And because we're at a national scale, getting those in-depth stories is going to be very complicated. But potentially we could look at a national, but then you don't want to risk generalizing things, do you? If you start looking at a national perspective of oral histories, there comes a risk of generalization, saying that all Māori believe in this one story, which is not true. So complicated reply, but really good question that I need to start thinking more about. Kia ora.
Yeah, but I would say our metaphorical stories our metaphorical sense, there's your story, my story, and somewhere in the middle lies the truth. Your Western science says there's no other way. And of course, it's about finding that your story, my story, in the middle will find the truth.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that's, I alluded that we actually had our presentations the wrong way around. I think if we had started with Ruana, she would have laid the foundation for where I think money was coming from. Then it would have been a perspective that came from a haukainga, from a hapu iwi, that will then lead to the research that you're doing to align the two. But, you know, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, because you've got to be careful where the kōrero is going to come from hapu iwi. And I know that most of them would want to have that conversation with the city, and maybe through that whole research that you're doing, you do come out with the collective values that each will give you. But it is a pathway that has to be taken. So I acknowledge that. On that note, I want to thank the presenters. You presented this to Roana and Hemi, to you, Nick, and to you as well. I'm sure this is not the last we will see of you. I'm sure a lot of us will be tapping into the research that you're producing, and I can see right away now that that needs to be shared with a wider group of hapu iwi throughout the region to access that information. So I want to thank you all for this presentation, and I hope to hear more of you. Well, we hope to hear more in the future. Ngā mihi. This leads us into our next presentation, and I hope it is a good segue for you, Chris. Without further ado, Chris is here to give us some perspectives on climate change and the Māori economy. So without further ado, Chris, welcome. Te a koe.
Sorry, do we have a... While Shari's finding some stuff, ka tira kia ora no tātou, tuatahi ka mihi atu ki te haupainga o ngai tarangi ka mihi atu ki a koutou no mo tō koutou nei wātea ki au nei, ki te hala mai ki te whakatako to etahi o tōku nei kōrero, ki roto I tēnei kōrero. Ka mihi atu ki a koutou I whakarongo mai I runga I te Zoom nei. Huri noa ki a tātou ki a koe te tia, ngā kaimahi ko koe ka Tarawina, mihi atu ki a koe o tātou nei tūtaki I tēnei wā. Huri no ki ngā mema o te kauni hera. Nui te mihi atu ki a koutou I tō koutou nei wā te ki au nei. I'm just trying to kill a little bit of time while Shari's trying to get something going up on the screen there. So what I'd like to do, I've just got a few slides that I'm just going to talk to. And I just want to start by saying this stuff is complicated. This climate change stuff is complicated. As I listen to Maru and I listen to Roana and Hemi talking about it from their points of view, on their marae, the stuff is complicated. The challenge is how do you kind of bring all of these things together while still trying to live, while still trying to drive your economy, while still trying to grow, if you like, who we are and our tiganga and culture. How do you actually drive all of this stuff together? So my point is it's complicated. I think back to 20 years ago, a friend of mine and I, that Tony knows really well, by the name of Paul Morgan, we sat in a room with the first Minister of Climate Change by the name of Pete Hodson. And we were talking about climate change. This was way before anyone knew really about the science of climate change or really knew about what NZUs were, you know, but we were sitting there listening to this minister, Pete Hodson, telling us about how he was going to nationalise the whole system of how to deal with climate change in New Zealand. And I remember distinctly Paul's words to that particular minister. I actually deeply respected the guy. He was a vet. He was a very blunt, direct vet. He was the first New Zealand Minister of Climate Change. And Paul said to him, well, Minister, if you do that, you're going to have a constitutional issue on your hands. You know, and Paul and I look back today, 20 years later, and we sort of chuckle to each other and say, it's still the same crap going on today. How we're still trying to navigate all of this stuff. And boy, we've been through 5 ministers, and we've been talking to those 5 ministers for the last 20 or 30 years. And we're still having this discussion. So I kind of just put this thing up on the table because meanwhile, when I listened to Akuhata replying to the thing here to Doug's question, you know, is the Pacific more vulnerable than, say, Europe? Well, we're watching the Pacific Islands go underwater. I'm sure you don't need to have a PhD to actually tell you that it's actually impacting us right now. 10 years ago, Tarawina, I remember coming to you for your help with us at Omaio, and we got a really brilliant person in your mapping team. You know, we didn't have all the fancy modeling tools that we do have today, like GISs. But I said to them, well, how can we actually mimic what would happen to our marae? This is 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, to understand which ones of our marae are going to be underwater. And so it was quite simple. We just said to those guys in your team, just model a 3-meter wave, and then model a 5-meter wave, and then model a 10-meter wave. And it showed us pretty quickly which of the marae. So my point is, we've been thinking about this stuff for a long time, you know, and I really, one of the things I'd like you to, take away from my discussion here is it's complex and it's hard work, but also the issue of speed. We can sit here and we can wait and watch, and I just listen to Maru's talk about, you know, we've known a lot of these issues and these stories through our history as Māori. Listen to our people, you know, take note of what they're saying. Yeah, you can wait until you've got all of the PhDs that come in behind that and confirm probably what Maru and us as Māori kind of already know. So look, that's kind of what I just really wanted to say by way of opening. The stuff is complicated. So I'm gonna, can I change this thing? Sure. How?
So.
Yeah. So here's what I kind of like, the framework I'd like to talk this stuff through. And it's this point that it's complicated and you can't think about climate change on its own. You can't, in my view. You've got to think about all of the other things like economics. How do you continue to live? You know, how do you continue to run your business, etc.? How do you think about the environment? How do you think about cultural issues? And so I'm going to go through the sort of framework of talking locally, thinking regionally what we've been doing here. And so the hats that I'm wearing here, I'm the chair of 3 of my trusts up on the coast. Yeah, so I'm talking from as the chair of some of my land blocks up the coast. But I'm also chair of the Tarawina Fisheries group of companies. So I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that we're doing at that level. But I'm also here with Taru as the chair of a group called Te Taumata, which is advocating the interests of Māori into all of the international discussions on trade. And climate change is woven all through every one of those trade agreements. So that's kind of the framework that I really want to talk to. So I talked about at home, on the coast, talked about the work I came to you, Tarawina, and you guys helped us with that, at our trust. Tarawina is also one of our absolute champions at home. Of course, I came to Tarawina about, 2 or 3 years ago and said, hey, I need some help. And because we'd done 2 or 3 years of research with NIWA, we actually did an in-depth study using the best scientists of this country and used our community as a kind of a pilot. And they actually painted all these fancy maps that confirmed what Maru's already said, that we already knew. We knew what was going to happen if our land got flooded. But we did this Western science and it confirmed all of that. But they stuck this neat technology on our land and in our communities. They stuck this automatic weather station with this network of sensors that they embedded all these sensors into the soils, and they could track, how fast, the water, how much water would land on the land, then how fast that water would throw through the soil profile, so you could figure out what amount of water you could actually deliver to your plants. Now, they did that with us. But when they finished the research, they came back and said, we're going to take all that fancy technology away. And we said, no. So I came to Tarawina and they said, we need your help. And the regional council helped. And I know Tarawina had to bend some rules to make this thing happen. And good on her for doing it. And so we now own that technology. It's a world-class piece of technology at the coast that is there to support all of our development, automatic weather station with all of this stuff on the coast. So I absolutely applaud you, Tarawina, for having the guts to get in behind our little old trust down there. And so that's our tono to you on behalf of our whānau at home. So my point is, Māori, like Maru, like what we saw on there with Hear Me, Māori are doing a lot of work, you know, in this space already, and it's hard work, you know, because I know firsthand. So then regionally, what have we been doing? So climate change. We, wearing my Tarawina Fisheries Group, 2 points I want to make here. We sat down with Sealord, the biggest fishing company in New Zealand. Sat down with Sealord, and I met with Doug Paul, and I said, hey, Doug, how about we do something together? You got all these emissions coming from these big boats of yours, these big $90 million boats that drive around. We never see them too, by the way, but they're out there. They're over the horizon. These are these deep water boats. Well, Sealord's got about 4 or 5 of those $90 million things burning up all this diesel, which we knew about. As I said to Doug, how about we get together, Doug, and we partner with you to actually create an offset for all of your emissions by planting some trees on our land here in the Waiariki. And that took about a year of hard work and crunching the numbers, and it went all the way up to the board of Sealord, and they eventually came back and said, yep, we're up for that. So it's a major project. It wasn't just about creating the offset too, by the way. It was a real landmark project in terms of using trees as a filter to stop sedimentation runoff and nutrient runoff from land into the streams around Lake Rotorua, and all of that sedimentation and nutrients running off down the Kaituna River, landing in the Mahetu estuary and landing out in the sea. So we knew it would deliver water quality as well, but it would also grow jobs and it would also grow wealth. Now, it took about a year to get that thing put together. Then James Shaw came along and killed it, the dumb bugger. Which is I'm leading into the national thing. So watch out for government; they'll get it wrong. This is the complexity. In his wisdom, and I know James really well, and I actually deeply respect the bugger, but he stuffed it up. He stuffed it up, and I met with him and said, "What the hell are you doing? You've killed this major project for Māori to participate in the climate change adaptation program, and you've killed it." What was he doing? Does anybody know what he did? You should know. You do know. He put up a proposal to outlaw, ban, or legislate away the right of Māori landowners, particularly, to plant fast-growing exotic trees on our land. That's what he did, and it killed our proposal with Sealord. Dumb, brainless, you know. And I've talked to James in this tone, and other ministers. So we did that. So what I'm saying is, look out for government. They can come in, they can cut across everything, and they can kill it and stuff it all up. Then what we've also got on the go here right now, and climate change is woven all through it. I'm leading a project involving all of the iwi of the Waiariki on large-scale aquaculture. And now we're at a point, we've done 2 years worth of research. We came up with a long list of species, we presented it back to our iwi in Rotorua, then in Whakatoa here, and we now narrowed it down to a list of 5. Now we're putting together the investment memorandums for those things that we expect to have done in the next 6 months or so, and climate change is woven all through this stuff. And now we're talking to the impact investments who love that climate change thing and growing communities and growing. You guys will know Bill Murphy and Alistair Rhodes and others like of their ilk. So they're all part of this discussion and they love it. They love this stuff. So in 6 months or so, we'll be rolling out our information memorandums to our own people. But we're also talking to other people around the world about those things. So in that's, and by the way, Dickie sits right alongside me. Some of you might be sitting here and say, where's Whakatoa here in all of this? Well, they sit right next door to me, as does Riki Raki. He's doing, because they're my cousins. So they sit on the governance group that I chair and driving this on behalf of all of our iwi. And climate change is woven all through it. My point that I'm making here, you've got to think about climate change, but also the economics and how do we grow people. So we've had Te Pūtea Whakatipu alongside Toyo Homai, do a study for us to calculate, to develop the workforce development plan for us. they've estimated that, at maturity, there's about 2,000 new jobs. So 2,000 new clean jobs, growing $1.5 billion of regional GDP at maturity of these projects. My point is, how do you weave climate change into all of this stuff, into all of these economics? The other thing that we've done there is we've formed an outstanding world-class, because it's come up here, team of scientists. So we've signed a formal MOU with Plant and Food, the Cawthron Institute, Waikato University, Otago University, who's Niwa, and actually the last one that signed up to the thing is Scion. So we're working now together with that team. Can we just flick one thing, please, and I'll come back to that screen. Next one, please. There's our team. There's Likirangi and all of us, and there's all of the representatives of all of those science organizations there with us, and we're working out what our short, medium, long-term science, research, and technology strategy is for our Waiariki region. This has been driven by our iwi. It's not been driven by the scientists, and it's most certainly not being driven by government. It's being driven by us as iwi. And again, I chair that. There's Chris Batishall. Some of you guys might know Chris. He's a neat guy at the Waikato University. He's a really smart guy. We all value him. So my point is, we've got that science program underway. It is substantial. And the commitment that we've had from all of our science players, Dino was in there somewhere too. Anyway, can we move back to my first slide? Next one, please. Yes. So here, I'm just making this point about regionally what's actually happening by us as Māori and how we're thinking about climate change, but how do we think about climate change as well as grow wealth, as well as grow people, and as well as grow our culture? That, it's not one versus the other. Nationally now, so the muck-up that Mr. Shaw's just made, we've managed to actually fix that. In a meeting with Mr. Shaw and 6 other ministers last week, and Minister Nash, we've got an agreement from Minister Nash to backtrack on that. And in fact, we've come up with a way that we think we can actually get the best of both worlds on how we can plant fast-growing exotics, as well as a nursery crop, and allowing that fast-growing crop of pines. So thereby you realize the economic value, but it becomes a nursery crop to actually incubate, for want of a better word, an understory of indigenous forest that comes through, and in time, over 100 years or more, the indigenous forest takes over. We're just getting the scientists and the technical people to affirm that that's actually doable. And on that basis, the government has backtracked on that. And by the way, that was us as Māori that led that. It wasn't forest owners, it wasn't everyone else. They were blooming too scared, frankly, to put their heads up. But we've got the ministers agreed to that, and that's a big deal for us as regionally, but also us as Māori people, but also us nationally. So now I step into the international space. Through the work that Taru and I and our team, we've been working. About 2 years ago, we started. We started out of a process where Taru led a process around the country to talk to our people and ask our people, was trade important? They all said, yep, it's bloody important. Then they also said to us, you guys have taken the time to come and talk to us about this stuff. You guys will be our voice. But they also said, and this is Taru and I, and Taru, we all know this, they also said, and don't muck around and don't muck it up. And so we've been unashamedly provocative to move all of those things forward, every one of those trade agreements. And we say with pride now that we played an instrumental role in securing, firstly, the UK Free Trade Agreement. First time ever, we were and are embedded into everything that's been negotiated out of that agreement. We pushed on the sea. I use, for example, and on the seafood space. Now there's no 16% tariff going into London. We own half the fishing industry, and I talked to our fishing industry leaders, and they said, wow, this is game changing for us. The UK Free Trade Agreement, it's massive. There's so much more I could talk about that, but we've replicated that now in the EU Free Trade Agreement, which is a $17 trillion economy in the world. And so again, there we have embedded everything, you know, Māori interest into every one of those things, and climate change is woven comprehensively through all of those things. And it's been we as Māori that have been championing getting climate change interest, you know, climate financing, science and research, adaptation, all of those things woven into all of those agreements. There is another one that we're working on right now. This is James Shaw's little baby, ACCTS, because James Shaw, like me, believes that the UN process is a waste of time. The UN process takes too long. You got to wait and get 100, because it's a democratic process that you need 96 countries all to agree. And when one doesn't agree, it stops. Meanwhile, the world keeps warming up. So this is James Shaw's response to that. He's put together a group of like-minded countries, like New Zealand, to try and make things happen faster. So we're sitting alongside James on that one as well, pushing our climate change stuff. And we're also doing a lot of things, and Tari's been really instrumental in this one, given all of his networks around the world, is building indigenous to indigenous links. And we've got amazing amount of stuff on the go. Taru, all of that stuff up there. We've signed an agreement with the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, partnering with us now, and we're sharing a lot of information to and fro together. And climate change keeps coming up in every one of those discussions, whether it's at home, nationally, regionally, nationally, or internationally. I've just got one last slide there, Sherry. That little chart there, that's our A team that we put together to have the discussions with government around what they were proposing on climate change. And it's worked. We have an outstanding team. They're all our leaders, chaired by Sir Toby. Sir Toby's not well right now, but he is our chair. He is our chair, and we've got our technical team there. They're up and running. They're working through those technical things with those government people to figure out that the growing regime for that forestry thing. So a really, really strong team, a healthy discussion with the ministers, albeit it was at times, you know, it was head-to-head discussion, but it needed to be, because they were going hell-bent on pushing this damn thing through, and it was wrong. They actually conceded it was wrong now. And this is my point about, I talked to James and I talked to Stuart Nash, and they both concede. This stuff is complicated. It really is, when you're trying to create national policy lined up with international policy, lining it up into regional policy, and making sure you're keeping all of the stakeholders happy. You know, us as Māori, so the cultural issues, the social issues, the economic issues, and the environmental issues. I hold a view, really, to the point that Murray was making. It is possible. It really is possible to do these things. And I really just boil it down, coming down to, it actually takes some guts, and it takes some leadership. So I think that's really my last point I just leave you with. This stuff is complicated. Listen to our Māori people. I've heard some brilliant things coming out of the discussion today. There's some really cool things. Don't dismiss them. They're worth listening to. So I'm happy to pause there.
Kia ora. Kia ora. I'm going to open the floor. Kia ora. I'm going to open the floor for questions.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. But kia ora, Tarawina. I'm not entirely in agreement with you about Shaw and Nash backtracking on the permanent forest.
Oh, they have, though.
Oh, no.
You haven't been into the discussion. I've been there face to face.
No. I've got all the reports on it. Yes.
Never mind the report. This is live. They have.
Yes, I know. But what I'm basically saying is that from afar, I've had discussions with other people inside,
sure,
and stuff, but not actually happy about the concept of
I know who they are too.
radial forestry, and they have a view, and I'm also somewhat convinced that the move away from permanent forestry was based on politics coming up for next year's election, with the majority of the Māori caucus supported the permanent forestry as opposed to the science. It's not, but interesting comments. I just thought I'd take that.
Well, let me respond to you, Bill. So that issue, I'm very alert to why there was that debate there. It was fundamentally federated farmers who are going out promoting that Māori were proposing to actually plant up all of this available land because they're concerned. Well, that's not what we were proposing. We've only been promoting that we plant fast-growing exotics on marginal land, That's all we were promoting, but the government was actually introducing legislation that was going to remove that as an option for us.
Yeah, if I can back it up, Bill, that it wasn't a matter of politics for the group that we worked with. It was a matter of having information that backed up right tree, right place, best use of land. And I think that's the approach that was always used by the group when we went forward. It makes sense. It takes politics out of it, and it looks at the position of Māori on 5% of the land they currently own, having lost 95% of the land, and therefore having the right and jurisdiction to actually make the decisions for the best interests of the land and the people who actually, at the end of the day, like Chris has said, benefit from an immediate economy, and then be able to transition over time to what we all want, which is Indigenous forests, which take 50 plus years to actually provide some value, but actually opening up and managing, save some of these other forest corporates who get the land and just leave the trees in, the fear factor there. Well, the fact that any management change regime could actually open up those trees, let sunlight in over the time, and make them legislatively make them manage it in a way that the Indigenous forest comes through. So this was actually about really analysing it from what made sense and what could create the best value, not what value it could bring for politicians. So I think that's the strength of what the group actually put around the table to these ministers. And, you know, I mean, if there was a back down, and there was, as Chris has said, that was what did it. And ultimately, it's hard to dispute the value approach that we use.
I'm totally in touch with the carrot value of carbon forestry. It's bloody incredible at $83 a tonne. I mean, yes, and I take your point about federated farmers. I would like to see our good farmland go in there, but it's an interesting, not entirely resolved debate yet, especially where I'm tabling. But I do follow it closely.
Yeah. Look, Bill, the final point for me on that, Māori are farmers too. We are farmers too. I talk to our Māori farmers, and they're the ones that really I lean on, and they say to me, this is the thing that I really have regard for. They say, look, it's whatever's best land use. Whatever's best land use. If best land use is, you know, high value farming, that's the choice. But on the marginal farming, if forestry is their only option, because that's the point with our Māori, we don't have any other options on that marginal land that's slipping away into the sea. So, you know, to remove that as an option, that was just not good.
I always have it. I went down to Pollock Bay 2 weeks after the event and rented at the hinterland, so I know what 1 million tonnes of rat out of slash looks like sitting in the middle of a gully. So
that was just dumb management.
I totally understand that, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah. Give my regards to Peter.
Yeah. Look, I think.
Councillors, can you direct the conversation to the chair, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, apologies. We should be addressing through the chair. I agree with that.
I think Councillor Clark has completed his questioning.
He has.
Tataru, do you have a?
Yeah, just a final comment. I think, you know, when you're looking at trade, and this is something that we've been really working on real hard, what we've found is that the corridor to trade internationally with the UK and the EU is premised on your green product, your ability to open that door and actually integrate climate change and create value on your products through that space. What Māori have actually positioned themselves as being purveyors of values that go way back in time, and actually looking at things like kaitiakitanga, manakitanga, whanaungatanga, and all those tangas that come through to create the value around product and presentation. So those are the things that have opened the door, and they have opened the door. When we've touched base with the ambassadors, we've touched base with the trade negotiators. And the other thing that's been really, really worked hard on is being able to have champions within the bureaucracy. Because, you know, one thing ministers can say, it's another thing that the bureaucrats act upon. And the reality is that we've had champions in foreign affairs and trade who have helped us get to the table and be part of the negotiations and co-creation and co-design of policies that benefit New Zealand. This wasn't about federated farmers or individuals. This is about our country actually positioning itself in a way that actually the international trade people are prepared to open the doors to us. And that was the major achievement for this particular group. Sorry, Madam Chair, that's my last comment.
Thank you, Tataru. Māori. Māori will be our last.
Yep, I'm interested in the riparian planning. There's economics in the riparian, but it's the right trees in the right place to stop the pathogens from going into the creeks. And there's opportunities for economic benefits. If we just take the middle tree, for example, if we grew middle trees all along the streams, the Keruru will become a pest, but we won't have to rely on Kentucky Fried Chicken. The second thing is that we were once upon a time major traders in the EEC. That was bombed out. It was bombed out mainly by the French, supported by the Americans, and the British was damned if we do and damned if we don't. And as a consequence, the Italians was the one who supported New Zealand in the EEC. So we were able to get at least 60–70% trade with the common market. There's an opportunity, if we do things right, that there'll be a demand that we go onto the common market. That's the economics part of it. What's your view on that?
Okay, two things, Chris Maru. On the riparians, absolutely support you, and in fact our proposal that we negotiated with Sealord, and I did actually start a discussion with the regional council whether there was any land that regional council had that was suited for riparian planting. We would be very, very interested to, I can't remember, Tarawina, who the lady was that I spoke to in your team, but now that the thing is back on the table, we'd be very, very interested to pick up that discussion on Murray's point about riparian plantings. So it's not just about massive big plantings, but also those more discrete things, because Murray's right, and we know it, that you plant up those areas, it helps in terms of filtering out the nutrients and filtering out the sedimentation that ends up ultimately out in the sea. So we're very keen, in fact, to pick up that discussion. Murray, on your second point, yeah, you know the history of our trading, where it comes from over time, and that we were big with the UK and we were big with the EU, and it kind of fell away like that. Well, these two agreements, and Madam Chair, this will be my last point, these two agreements that we've just struck, they're a real win-win for New Zealand. They're not just a win for Māori, they are a win-win for New Zealand. And really what it came down to, in the final moments of the final discussions of getting that EU free trade agreement over the line, they were talking directly to our people, who were giving them some feedback in terms of saying, say this, write this into that chapter, write this into that chapter. It was a very personal discussion that we were having. And I've had some feedback from those negotiators, and they said, at the end of the day, it was what you guys were telling those negotiators on the EU side that got these things over the line. We had our Waikato regional hui about 3 weeks ago over in Hamilton with Waikato Tairi. And at the end of the first day, I was driving back to Rotorua and my phone goes. And it's Nina Obermeyer. And she's in my phone. And so I said, kia ora, Nina. Nina's the EU ambassador. I said, kia ora, Nina. What are you doing? I thought you were up in Brussels negotiating this bloody big deal. She goes, oh, of course I had to come back. There's something happened and I had to come back. I want to know if I can come to your hui tomorrow on the second day of our... And I just said to her, Nina, you come. Our people would love to hear from you personally about what was negotiated up there in the EU. And she did. And she, and our people really loved it. And my real point is, this stuff is complicated. If you're going to solve it, one, you need the leadership, but you need to build real strategic relationships. Real strategic relationships. Now, koina, waku nei kōrero e te tia koutou, kai a koe.
Tēnā koe, Chris. I want to thank you for your presentation, applaud the presentation, and that you've come to share that with us. It's kōrero we had to hear, I feel, and kōrero we need to take on board. What we look at in our swim lane, taking into consideration all those things that you've raised for us. Again, ka nui te mihi kia koe. Thank you. Okay, we're heading down the home straight. We may make a few changes. We do have one more presentation, and that is Elba. I'm also happy to take a lead for the councillors. Our final report I'm going to take as read, and we could leave it at that, but if there was any request from councillors, I'm quite happy to leave the presentation. It's probably a good segue for the new Komiti Māori that comes aboard, of where the Komiti Māori has tracked but in helping us track our time and keep to our timing, we will listen to Albert with the Smart Growth Tangata Whenua Forum progress, and I'll come back again and make this decision with some guidance from you, whether we just accept our final one. So without further ado, but before I do go on, I do want to move back to the report that was provided by Nick Newman and ask for a mover and a second of the rec. Thank you, Councillor Light. Thank you, Councillor Clark. All those in favour say aye. Those against? No, carried. Thank you. And yes, so we'll move to our next presentation. Alba, I can see her on the screen. Welcome, Alba. I see that you've only got 2 slides in your presentation. So welcome, Alba. Kei a koe.
Kia ora tātou. I noticed I had the pre-lunchtime slot, so I thought I'd just keep it short and sweet. 2 slides total. So the purpose of this presentation is just to provide a bit of an update from the Combined Tangata Whenua Forum of Smart Growth. I think most of you should know what smart growth is, but for anyone else who doesn't, it's I guess a collaboration between council, tangata whenua, central government agencies to ensure that growth within the Western Bay of Plenty sub-region happens in the right places and in the right way. I'm very fortunate, privileged to be working with the Combined Tangata Whenua Forum. I guess it's a mega forum comprising representatives from iwi and hapu who sit on lots of different forums within the sub-region. So we have a forum within Tauranga City Council, Te Rangapu. Western Bay of Plenty District Council now have 2 separate tangata whenua forums, one for Te Arawa, one for Tauranga Moana. And so all of those representatives are also part of the Combined Tangata Whenua Forum. We're also fortunate to have Councillor McDonald on board with us as well, and she's also the chair of our forum, so very lucky to have her. Out of our mega group, our forum, we also have 4 representatives who sit around the table with the Smart Growth Leadership Group. So this is just more the context of who we are. And then where I fit into it, because as you know, I wear multiple hats. Myself and Te Pio Kawe, we sit alongside as the 2 Pakari advisors. So we filled in the giant shoes left by Shad Rolliston. Te Pio provides the strategic advice and I provide the operational technical advice, not only for the forum members, but also for all of our partner agencies. So they're there to provide just excellent support across the kupu. Anyway, one of the things that I wanted to share with everyone is in our forums, we're at a place now where they're determining their future. So what that means is, in the past, they would meet, they would receive updates from Smart Growth partners about projects. And they're now at a point where they actually want to be progressing some of their own projects that also deliver smart growth outcomes. So one of the things that we whipped up earlier this year was, I guess, their own, one-page strategy, just to clarify, their long-term vision and their role in delivering that vision. So we use the phrase "Kia tū Pakari ai tātou," so together we thrive. So that highlights the importance of the forum members working collectively for the greater good, as well as just the important statements around, what is the role of the forum? What is it that only they can do in delivering the vision? So that's articulated there on the first little box, the left. And then the other thing we started working on is, well, what specifically does that look like in practice? So we developed 5 collective outcomes around land. So our people are enabled to occupy, develop and use multiple owned Māori land, treaty settlement land. Te ngākau, so this is highlighting, I guess, the role of marae. I mean, that's the centre of our individual and collective universes. So making sure that our marae communities are connected to, health services, education, sporting, public transport. Te taiao, so I guess that's just knowing that, the health and well-being of the natural environment is not compromised as a result of development and growth. Ngā wāhi tūpuna, so that's the cultural heritage component. So making sure that our sites and areas of cultural significance are looked after and protected. And finally, Manawarua. So this was I guess this links in with the previous presentations around making sure that our communities and our cultural infrastructure, including our wāhi tapu and our marae, are resilient to that changing climate. So that's, I guess, more of a snapshot on who we are as a collective. And one thing we did move towards was just, some priority projects. So, I mean, this is the last slide, just highlighting the kinds of things that we're focusing on to deliver those 5 outcomes as well as that vision. So we're trying to keep things simple, although the actual DUI behind the projects is more complicated. But anyhow, so the first one, which is a really chunky one, which is around realising Māori housing. So that's Te Peo's portfolio. So this is around enabling or helping those who want to build, particularly housing, including papapainga on Māori land, general land, treaty settlement land. So it's like one of the pressing topics, or the hot topics for Aotearoa. Second, spatial planning. So that's my portfolio. So this was a kaupapa that I presented to Komiti Māori back in December, I think. So this is around, we've got a good picture on where tangata whenua used to be, around the sites of significance. We know where they are. So you've got marae, or kuta kaupapa. But one of the focus areas for spatial planning is where tangata whenua want to be. What is the future like for them, particularly around with regards to our marae communities and aspirations for housing. Third project is cultural heritage research led by Des Heke. So this is around looking at, this is researching planning mechanisms to either mitigate or offset the impacts on cultural heritage. So offsets are something that have been used a lot, like with native bush biodiversity offsets, but we want to see if this can apply within cultural heritage. And finally, the fourth portfolio, that's Buddy Mikaides, is around implementation of the good old acronyms, Transport System Plan. So this is a plan that's already been developed, but it's guiding the implementation. Probably one of the key things under here are the bullet points at the bottom. So this is the stuff that happens in the background just to help progress our projects. The first one is building our collective capability and capacity. There's a missing word there. So this is something that I'm guiding the forum members through around, building technical knowledge and skills. So some of the topics some of the training we're going to do over the next year is training around iwi and hapu management plans, spatial mapping and planning, building knowledge around what impacts of climate change. And I think it's this whole thing of if you can build that collective capability, everyone wins, to say the least. Making sure there's that effective communication and engagement, within tangata whenua, so with our respective whānau, hapu, iwi, marae committees and Māori land entities. So while our representatives, while we have 35, 40 representatives, it's making sure that whatever we're doing is filtering down, but also we're collecting the voice of each of those, our groupings. So that's a huge undertaking, given the number of hapu and iwi that we have in the sub-region, the number of marae committees and the Māori land block. So it's a big task. And finally, the support from Smart Growth Partner Agencies. So this is some of the work that Te Peo and I do around linking with your respective Māori policy teams, particularly around the collective capability component, as well as your planning teams and just across the board. So, I mean, one of the results of that is we've secured a secondment from Western Bay of Plenty. It's our Māori planner who can provide us with some technical support, as well as, funding across the board to help with some of our training programs. So, I mean, that's pretty much in a nutshell. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alva. I'll quickly go around the room. Any questions? Doesn't appear to be. Thank you very much for that update, Alva. I am aware that the Smart Growth Leadership Group meeting is tomorrow, and I'm sure the reps will be elaborating a bit more on what you've just told us. So thank you very, very much for the presentation. Ngā mihi. We're definitely on the home straight. Going to take the report as read and just allow Tarawina to give an overview of the reports. Just, Tarawina just reminded me before we go there, just for the chair's report and before Tarawina starts that overview, can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Chairman Leader, Councillor Brunning. All those in favour say aye. Thank you. Moved. Tarawina.
Tēnā koutou, councillors. Thank you for your indulgence. I appreciate it. It's been a long meeting, and I guess that's one of the great values of Komiti Māori, is that our local voices take precedence in our meeting, and it was fabulous to hear the presentations today. Just draw your attention to page 33 of the agenda. I'll just quickly go through it. I did prepare a PowerPoint, but in the essence of time, if you'd like to see that, I can provide that post-meeting. And I just would like to, it's been a 3-year journey, and this is the last meeting of Komiti Māori in this triennium until our new training commences. So just some highlights throughout the report. A key highlight was, of course, the extension to the terms of reference and bringing together it as a committee of the whole. I think Komiti Māori is a great structure at the moment where all the councillors are part of it, part of the decision making, and able to experience that cultural side that Komiti Māori is very strong in. I think that is definitely a unique feature. And just on that, we're still the only committee of its like in the country. So we've had the first Māori seats, bespoke legislation, and one of a kind Komiti Māori in the country. And so we are the tuakana in every sense in this space. And so congratulations to Komiti Māori. We have, if you look at page 37, there's just a few little statistics for you. We've had 41 presentations to this committee over the last 3 years, from dignitaries like Minister Mahuta and Justice, who came and spoke to us about treaty, to locals, kaitiaki at all levels. And we've just broken them down there because all of our presenters, they're corded or contribute directly to our community outcomes. And just on that, just some highlights. I'm happy to take questions. I just think sometimes it's good to sing our praises. We don't do that a lot. And along with our other committees, this committee is a great committee of Tarawina. So kia ora, I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions or comments from the councillors? So, Chairman Leader, Councillor White.
Not a comment, not a question, Chair, but a comment. And I'll talk for the comments made in here. But can I just acknowledge Tarawina and her Māori policy team, because as recently as last Friday, we had a visit from Hawke's Bay Regional Council. We had the chair, we had 3 members, 2 elected members, I think, Tarawina of the council, and there was 3 Māori participants as well. And they just wanted an overview of how Bay of Plenty Regional Council Tarawina presents, delivers Māori engagement. They're most impressed. So I'd just like to acknowledge Tarawina and her team for doing this, and also her contribution through Ngāi Karapu, which is the Regional Council of SIG, which she chairs or leads, I think. So yeah, don't underestimate the influence that Tarawina and her team are having, both locally and nationally.
Yes, just to endorse, the kumara never says how sweet it is, but this kumara is going to say how sweet it is. No, I think my own personal view is that the Komiti Māori has certainly stood up. And if you don't listen to what I've got to say on this one, but you listen to what other people are saying, when we sat down at the Maruwata Hui with the last Local Government New Zealand conference, we're sitting at a table and none of them came to join us, and they looked at our badge and it said, Bay of Plenty Regional Council. Damn, we're at the right table, you know. They were praising the mahi and the work that we were doing. And these were other Māoris from other regional councils. And, you know, so I want to applaud all of our councillors for making the decision to raise, I guess, the mana of Komiti Māori the way they did. You know, and I'm pleased with that. I'm sure that everybody has been dutifully exposed to all the presentations, including the last one, which was provocative in some ways. But look, there's nothing wrong with provocation, you know, as long as it doesn't get out of hand. And I think sometimes these types of provocations are good to have to a degree. But I'm just want to say to councillors, as a constituency member for Kure, that thank you. Mihi kia koutou. I don't think it's necessarily an easy journey and decision for people to make, but we're a trendsetter, and I think that's good for the regional council. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I'd just like to say that as I'm actually what we call an voluntary retreat from this forum, as fellow councillor Norm, a number of you may be in voluntary retreat, but that's yet to be decided. No, Komiti Māori has been an absolute high point of my whole association with this council, to see how it's grown. Yes, I enjoy the vigor of the debate. And by the way, I've known Karamea for 40 years. It's okay. We've been there before. But yeah, and I'd just like to say, yeah, kia ora and big heads up to the Komiti Māori and the Māori policy folk for actually making this a really interesting journey for me for the last 6 years. So kia ora.
Just briefly, I wasn't 100% sure, to be honest, when we made it a committee of the whole, but it was definitely the right decision, no doubt about that. But the question is, do you have any, two things. One is induction is going to be important next term for the new group of elected members. And secondly, have you got any thoughts about improvement moving forward?
Got to get back in first. Well, I guess there's very little that left for me to say, because you've all provided it. But I guess as the chair of Komiti Māori, I too want to thank all our councillors for the mahi and working with Komiti Māori over the last 3 years. We have made great progress. And I guess the proof in what we've done is still to come. So that's, you raised the question, do you know where we want to go in the next triennium? If I come back to council, the answer is yes. If I'm outside of council, working closer with the Māori, the answer is yes. So wherever, we land up, I think the work of the Komiti Māori will continue. It will get stronger, and definitely will create a bigger platform for Māori to be having conversations with our council. So, on that note, I want to thank everybody. I was going to say thank you to Councillors Clark and Norm Barney, but actually there may be others around the table that we may not be returning, so it's a wait and see who returns. But on that note, and our councillors that are on Zoom, thanks for working with Komiti Māori and the great contribution we have all made to getting Komiti Māori from where it is. So thank you, everybody. And on that note, I'm going to pass to Taru to close our hui.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On that happy note, and I wish everybody all the best. The context of this is the last Komiti Māori hui, and we shall see what the future brings. But at least we've made a start. And Councillor Crosby, yes, there's always room for improvement, and part of that is, in my view, my last word is understanding, I think, what has been incorporated in some of the thinking about governance to governance connection in terms of maximising the value of iwi engagement. You know, and by that I mean, you know, sometimes the constituency members have to work with the governors of other institutions where our operational staff sometimes cannot treat and get the real value of out of that connection going forward. So on that note, I'll just
thank you, Tony. I've just got one sorry.
No, you do what you've got to do, process.
Okay, we've just missed one report, and that was 11.2. The Komiti Māori highlights a report by Chairman Leader. All those in favour say aye. Carry. Thank you.
Okay, he got to keep up with tātou, kei nui tātou. Tūtaua mai runga, tūtaua mai raro, tūtaua mai waho, tūtaua mai i roto. Ke tau wai te Māori tū, ke tau wai te Māori ora, ki te katoa, home year, hui year, tai ki year. Kia ora.
Ah.